Hugues de Payen, a French aristocrat, established the Order of Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon, also referred to as the Order of the Temple or the Knights Templar, in Jerusalem circa 1119. The Holy City, in Christian control since the First Crusade 2 decades prior, was the primary destination for European pilgrims. They arrived in large numbers, oblivious to the perils that awaited them. The highways surrounding Jerusalem were infamous for the bands of bandits that plagued them, targeting pilgrims to the holy sites. Occasionally, these marauders were Saracens. At other times, they were fallen crusaders. In response to this threat, Hugues de Payen assembled a cohort of 9 knights to safeguard the pilgrims. Hugues and his siblings did not resemble the knights portrayed in popular imagination. In their formative years, they required financial resources, donned given apparel, and sought additional recruits and equipment. By 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Templars had rapidly ascended to the status of heroes throughout Christian Europe. Between 1139 and 1145, the Pope promulgated a succession of 3 papal bulls that conferred upon the Templars nearly absolute authority, rendering them accountable solely to the pontiff. This was one of the most profound revolutions in the Middle Ages, if not in European history as a whole. To comprehend the rapid ascendance of the Templars from modest origins, it is essential to investigate Jerusalem's context at their commencement and trace the city's history back to the original Temple of Solomon. The initial temple in Jerusalem was the Temple of Solomon, constructed by the formidable monarch in 950 BC. King David, his progenitor, selected the location, presently referred to as the Temple Mount, or the Temple Platform, as he identified it as the site where Abraham had arranged for the sacrifice of his son Isaac. Abraham, a patriarch of the Jewish nation, is thought to have existed 18 centuries before Christ. His effort to sacrifice Isaac epitomized his compliance with God and his reverence for him. As Abraham elevated the knife to sacrifice his son, God intervened and commanded him to desist. Abraham acquiesced, and God expressed satisfaction. He assured Abraham that he would bestow abundant benefits upon him and multiply his descendants, the Jews, to be as numerous as the stars in the heavens and the grains of sand on the seashore. The site of the intended sacrifice subsequently became a symbol of the Jews' indissoluble connection with God. Furthermore, the temple was intended to contain the Ark of the Covenant, designed to preserve the stone tablets inscribed with the 10 commandments Moses received from Mount Sinai. Similar to the narrative of Abraham and Isaac, the commandments served as concrete evidence of the Jews' covenant with the divine. Legend asserts that Solomon was the most sagacious of men, and his reign epitomizes the zenith of the Jewish nation. The temple he constructed in Jerusalem became a locus of wonder, pilgrimage, and reverence. However, it was not destined to endure. The Assyrians initially occupied Israel, and the Chaldeans succeeded in 586 BC. Nebuchadnezzar, their monarch, commanded the obliteration of the temple and the subjugation of the Jewish populace in Babylon. In 515 BC, the Persian monarch Cyrus expelled the Chaldeans, permitting the Jews to return and reconstruct the temple. The 2nd century BC political instability prompted Israel to seek protection from Rome. What began as diplomatic intervention evolved into occupation by the time of Julius Caesar's visit in 47 BC. This resulted in significant dissatisfaction and the establishment of factions opposed to Roman governance. A widespread anticipation existed for a Messiah who would ultimately deliver the Jewish people from the oppression of occupation. Some regarded this figure as Jesus, whose adherents encountered outlawry and persecution as instigators and, in certain instances, terrorists. In 70 CE, the Jews insurrected. The Romans avenged violently, suppressing the insurrection and demolishing the temple for a second time. Simeon ben Koseba, whom Rabbi Akiba regarded as the prophesied Messiah, spearheaded another insurrection in 134. Simeon ben Kosaba also suppressed this, resulting in a prohibition on Jews entering Jerusalem entirely. By the early 4th century, Jerusalem emerged as a sacred place for Christianity, a newly established faith. In 312, the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and ordered the construction of churches at the sites of Christ's birth in Bethlehem and his crucifixion and resurrection in Jerusalem, known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Constantine's nephew and successor, Julian the Apostate, did not adhere to his uncle's views, resulting in the empire reversing paganism. Julian commenced the reconstruction of the temple as a deliberate provocation towards Christians, notwithstanding his relentless persecution of the Jews. Following Julian's demise in 363, the project encountered challenges and ultimately succumbed to neglect. Jerusalem appeared fated to remain without another temple. The temple and the mosque. In the 4th century, the Roman Empire, facing administrative challenges, was divided into two parts. Rome governed the western half, while Byzantium presided over the eastern half. The Visigoths invaded Rome in 410, and Jerusalem emerged as one of the Byzantine Empire's treasures. They transformed the Temple Mount into a mound of debris. In 638, Jerusalem capitulated to Caliph Omar, resulting in the city coming under Muslim control. Since the Prophet Muhammad established it with the Hijra in 622, when he traveled from Mecca to Medina, signifying the commencement of the Muslim calendar, Islam has swiftly proliferated over the Middle East. The Byzantines appeared unable to halt its advance and withdrew northward. Jerusalem holds sacred significance for Muslims, especially the Temple Mount, as it is the location of the Prophet's ascension to paradise. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, Omar intended to pray and decided to construct the Al-Aqsa Mosque at that location. Omar constructed a second, more magnificent mosque on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, near the conclusion of the 7th century. Jerusalem was farther distant than ever from Christian control. Islam persistently influenced Christian Europe, as most of the Mediterranean and the Iberian Peninsula came under Muslim dominion throughout the 7th and 8th centuries. By the mid-11th century, a novel Islamic menace had arisen from the Seljuk Turks. Originating from Central Asia, they migrated northward, subjugating Baghdad and adopting Islam. They targeted Byzantium and, in 1071, vanquished the imperial army at Manzikert in Armenia. Within 10 years, they had also captured Nicaea and dominated Asia Minor. At present, the territories west of the Bosphorus constituted the Byzantine Empire, and Emperor Alexius sought aid from the west to prevent inevitable destruction. In the spring of 1095, a delegation reached the Council of Piacenza in northern Italy. Despite the definitive schism between the Eastern and Western churches in 1054, Pope Urban II had taken conciliatory actions towards Constantinople by revoking Alexius's excommunication. Consequently, the Eastern delegation approached the council with a degree of optimism. Urban II acknowledged the Eastern delegation's plea for assistance. Urban held a bishops' assembly in Clermont that November to address the issue. On Tuesday, 27th of November 1095, following a week-long ecclesiastical discussion in the cathedral, Urban addressed a large assembly outside the walls of Clermont. He urged those present to cease hostilities among themselves, since internecine conflict had plagued Europe since the destruction of Rome in 410. He advocated for their efforts to be redirected towards combating the infidel in the East and restoring Jerusalem to the embrace of Mother Church. The audience was jubilant, exclaiming, "Deus lo volt," God wills it, resonating from the city fortifications. A bishop and a cardinal promptly knelt before Urban and implored them to participate in the effort. The First Crusade commenced. The Crusaders advanced southward upon their arrival in Constantinople in late 1096, capturing Nicaea in June of the subsequent year. Edessa and Antioch succumbed in 1098, and the Crusaders ultimately reached the periphery of the Holy City on 7th June 1099. Jerusalem ultimately succumbed on 15th July following a brutal massacre. This marked the first occasion it had been under Christian control for 461 years. Godefroy de Bouillon, a leader of the Crusades, declared himself the defender of the Holy Sepulchre, founding the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. It was referred to as Outre-mer, the territory beyond the seas in Europe. Following the First Crusade's triumph, the majority of surviving Crusaders returned to Europe, allowing Baldwin of Boulogne, after Godefroy's sudden death in the autumn of 1100, to become the inaugural King of Jerusalem. His territory extended southward to the Red Sea and northward to Beirut. Raymond de Saint-Gilles, Count of Toulouse, governed the county of Tripoli, situated to its north. To the north of Tripoli lay the Principality of Antioch, governed by Bohemond of Taranto. The surviving Christian kingdoms were the county of Edessa to the northeast, the inaugural Latin kingdom created by the Crusaders in 1098, and Cilician Armenia to the northwest, located in Turkey. The feudal system that predominated Europe from the late Dark Ages significantly influenced Outremer, a consortium of tiny, predominantly coastal kingdoms governed by allied European nobility. Subsequent to the disintegration of the Western Roman Empire, successive incursions by invaders such as the Saracens and Magyars from the east and the Vikings from the north devastated Europe. The persistent conflicts among kingdoms established the feudal system in the 16th century. The kingdoms of Europe needed a cohesive power structure, rendering kings mostly ineffective in safeguarding their subjects. A man must serve the local landowner to obtain security and sustenance for his family. In the absence of a standing army, the landlord would consistently require the enlistment of troops to defend his territories. Consequently, the guy pledged allegiance to the lord and was recognized as his vassal. Vassalage necessitated the individual to pledge an oath of allegiance to his master and remain available to combat on his behalf if required. In exchange, the lord would provide the vassal land, or occasionally the income from religious institutions, sustaining the family and generating revenue for the lord's treasury through taxes imposed on the land. Amidst this context, knights began to arise. The lord-vassal system likely developed from the ancient Roman practice of commendation, wherein a soldier would commit to serving a higher officer in exchange for a reward determined by that officer. Typically, it manifested as a land grant referred to as a benefice. European rulers like Charlemagne commenced the adoption of this tradition by bestowing land concessions upon their most esteemed warriors. The warriors would employ vassals to cultivate the land for them, allowing them the freedom to enhance their military and equestrian abilities. Knights and vassals, despite their oaths of devotion to their lords, could serve an alternative lord if the protection was insufficient, or if the lord was ousted or slain. In most instances, the association among lord, knight, and vassal became hereditary. A coalition of lords, knights, and vassals commanded the Crusaders that besieged Jerusalem in the summer of 1099, each pledging complete absolution of their terrestrial sins for their involvement in the crusade, sometimes called pilgrimage. The chance of remission also attracted other, less reputable individuals. The latter category was condemned felons and excommunicates who exploited the crusade to evade punishment in their homeland. Consequently, once the city was securely under Frankish control, most of the remaining crusaders returned to Europe, fulfilling their goals of capturing the Holy City and exonerating themselves from transgressions. Baldwin then confronted the challenge of governing a kingdom devoid of a standing army for its defense. Despite all major cities and ports of Outremer being under Christian control, the kingdom's roadways remained highly insecure. Despite being under Muslim dominion, the Holy Land consistently drew Christian pilgrims, and with a Christian monarch now reigning in Jerusalem, their numbers increased significantly. The sacred sites, dispersed across the kingdom, encompassed locations such as Sephoria, where the Virgin spent her youth; Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ; the River Jordan, where John the Baptist, residing in a nearby cave, baptized Christ; and several areas surrounding the Sea of Galilee, which were integral to Christ's ministry. Mount Tabor served as the scene of the Transfiguration, but the route from Jerusalem to Jericho was where the Good Samaritan exhibited his benevolence. Nevertheless, the pilgrims were perpetually at risk beyond the confines of Jerusalem, as assaults by groups of Saracen marauders were commonplace. Tales of difficulties emerged as early as 1106. That year, a Russian abbot named Daniel documented his journey to the tomb of St. George at Lydda. Numerous springs exist in this area. Tourists pause by the water, albeit with considerable trepidation, as it is an uninhabited region. The nearby town of Ascalon is the source from which Saracens emerge to attack travelers on these routes. Ascending from that location to the hills induces significant trepidation. Nevertheless, that was insignificant when compared to Galilee. This location is very frightening and hazardous. Many large palm trees stand throughout the town, resembling a lush forest. It is dreadful and challenging to reach, as it is inhabited by fierce pagan Saracens who assault visitors at the fords. 13 years later, conditions had deteriorated further. In Easter 1119, Saracens assaulted a contingent of 700 pilgrims en route to the River Jordan, leading to 300 fatalities and the enslavement of 60 individuals. Roger, the regent of Bohemond II of Antioch, ambushed and annihilated his troops in the Field of Blood later that year. This prompted a surge of calls for additional assistance from the West, leading to a council of ecclesiastical leaders convening in Nablus in January 1120 to discuss the matter. When Roger and his soldiers encountered their demise on the Field of Blood, Baldwin II had been reigning as the successor to Baldwin I in Jerusalem for 1 year. In 1119, he is thought to have received 2 French noblemen, Hugues de Payen from Champagne and Godfrey de Saint-Omer from Picardy. They suggested providing protection for pilgrims traveling to and from the holy places, accompanied by 7 additional knights. However, they would not operate as conventional knights. Instead, they would exist as a diminutive monastic community adhering to the rule of St. Augustine. Baldwin appreciated the concept. The labor has consistently been a challenge in Outremer, and Hugues and his brethren's willingness to live as monks suggests they would be more reliable than certain individuals who took part in the First Crusade. The king sanctioned the idea, and on Christmas Day, Hugues and Godfrey pledged vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience before Baldwin and Warmund of Picquigny, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin then allocated them accommodations at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple platform. The Order of Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon, the Order of the Temple, and the Knights Templar were established. The Council of Nablus acquainted the clergy with the Templars shortly after establishing their order. The attendees approved the 9 knights, and Hugues and his siblings initiated their duty of overseeing the kingdom. The additional founding knights included Payen de Montdidier, André de Montbard, Archambault de Saint-Aignan, and Geoffrey Bissol, together with 2 knights identified solely by their Christian names, Roland and Gondomar. The identity of the 9th member is unknown. The initial decade of the Templars is the least well documented. Following Nablus, it can be inferred that they persisted in their monastic existence within the Temple of Solomon, the appellation assigned by the Crusaders to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, while safeguarding pilgrims arriving by maritime routes at harbors such as Jaffa. Notwithstanding their impoverished condition and inadequate armor and weaponry, they commenced garnering backing from the West. In 1120, Fulk V, Count of Anjou, encountered Hugues de Payen during his journey to Outremer. He was greatly impressed by Hugues and his emerging order, which led him to join as an associate of the Templars, committing to providing them with an annual income of 30 livres angevines. Motivated by Fulk's precedent, numerous other French nobility followed suit, with Hugh, Count of Champagne, possibly the most significant. Hugh initially visited Outremer in 1104, where he resided for 4 years. He returned once more in 1114. Hugues de Payen accompanied him on one of these instances. Hugues was one of his vassals, whereas Payen resided downstream from Troyes, the site of Hugh's court. Hugues may possess a familial relationship with his lord. Upon Hugues and his 8 companions taking their vows at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Hugh had once more returned to France. He returned to the Holy Land for the final time in 1125, when he ultimately joined the Templars. However, the complete significance of Hugh's association with the Templars would only become evident briefly. In 1127, although the Templars were reportedly limited to 9 knights and facing challenges in recruitment, King Baldwin II dispatched Hugues de Payen and 6 fellow Templars on a significant diplomatic expedition to Europe. The appointment of Hugues to such a prominent position suggests that, contrary to the perceptions of the Templars as poor knights, they had acquired substantial respect in Outremer by this time. Furthermore, Hugues accompanied several knights who, if their number remained at 9, would have resulted in only a handful of brethren remaining in Outremer. Chroniclers like Michael the Syrian, d. 1199, among the earliest to record the Templars, estimated that the order had approximately 30 active knights at the time of Baldwin's embassy. In the autumn of 1127, the Templar delegation, accompanied by William of Bures, the Prince of Galilee, and Guy of Brisbard, Lord of Beirut, traveled to France by sea. William and Guy aimed to convince Fulk of Anjou to wed Baldwin's daughter Melisende, thus positioning him to inherit the crown of Jerusalem, given that Baldwin lacked a male heir. Baldwin tasked Hugues with a new assignment: to enlist knights for an anticipated crusade against Damascus, and to obtain the Templars' formal acknowledgement by the Western Church. Fulk consented to return to Outremer and wed Melisende. Baldwin enlisted numerous fresh soldiers for his Damascene crusade, and, perhaps most significantly, Hugues encountered Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, rendering the mission a remarkable success. From that point forth, with Saint Bernard's steadfast support, the Knights Templar ascended from obscurity to prominence in European history in a remarkable manner. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was the preeminent church father of his era. A Burgundian noble, he was born at Fontaines-les-Dijon around 1090. A dedicated individual foretold a remarkable future for Bernard while he was still in utero, and he appears to have matured into adulthood with distinct intensity and vision. He was a fascinating man with intense passions, who sought a religious organization to tame his explosive personality, entering the Cistercian organization at Cîteaux in 1113 alongside approximately 30 fellow Burgundian lords. 3 years later, he guided a small assembly of monks to establish a new Cistercian monastery in the adjacent Wormwood Valley, which they designated Clairvaux, Valley of Light. Hugh of Champagne had notably bestowed the territory upon them during the Count's second trip to Outremer. Under Bernard's leadership, the newly established foundation at Clairvaux rapidly attracted the fervent, resulting in the house's prosperity. The precise date of Bernard's conversion is uncertain. The saint first encountered the Templars or met Hugues de Payen in 1174, just 21 years posthumously. In 1126, King Baldwin likely corresponded with Bernard, soliciting his assistance in formulating a rule for the order and securing both recognition and support in the West. Bernard recognized the circumstances in the East and understood that Outremer required knights to prepare for active military engagement rather than singing and wailing monks. His astute awareness of the situation in Latin Syria likely stemmed from his association with Hugh of Champagne, who returned to the Holy Land for the third and final time in 1125, becoming a fully fledged Templar, as well as from André de Montbard, one of the original 9 knights, and Bernard's uncle. If Hugues and the Templar delegation sailed to Europe in the autumn of 1127, it is plausible that Bernard encountered the Templar Grand Master late that year or in the subsequent spring before Hugues commenced his official mission, which would culminate in the Council of Troyes in January 1129. Upon Hugues's arrival in Europe, events commenced progressing rapidly. Theobald, Count of Blois and successor to Hugh of Champagne, granted the Templars their initial territory in the west in October 1127, which comprised a house, a grange, a meadow, and a tenement in Provence. Theobald granted his vassals the authority to freely contribute to the order from their land holdings. William Clito, the Count of Flanders, contributed to the order during this period, as did his successor, Thierry of Alsace, following William's death in combat on 27 May 1128. 4 days later, Hugues arrived in Anjou, where he observed Fulk taking the cross, a pledge to defend Christianity against the infidel. On 17th of June, he participated in the nuptials of Fulk's eldest son, Geoffrey, to Matilda, the daughter of Henry III of England, allowing Fulk to journey to Jerusalem as Baldwin had anticipated. Hugues obtained additional grants of land and funds, and the marriage presumably facilitated his invitation to England in the summer of 1128. Hugues' trip to England led to the founding of the inaugural Templar House, or Preceptory, in London, located at the northern extremity of present-day Chancery Lane, alongside monetary donations from the king and the procurement of many locations beyond the capital. Hugues journeyed from England to Scotland before residing in Flanders over autumn, acquiring additional donations and making preparations for Troy. On 13th January 1129, Hugues de Payen addressed the Council of Troy before a distinguished assembly of clergy. Bernard was present in person, despite suffering from a fever, along with Stephen Harding, abbot of Citeaux, the archbishops of Sens and Reims, 10 bishops, Count Theobald of Champagne, and, as noted by Jean Michel, the council's scribe, several others whose names would be tedious to enumerate: Godfrey de Saint-Omer, Geoffrey Bissol, Payen de Montdidier, Roland, Archambault de Saint-Aignan, and Hugues represented the Templars. Matthew of Albano, the papal legate, presided over the entire delegation. In his address, Hugues elucidated the origins of the order and the rule governing their existence. Participation in the offices, community meals conducted in silence, simple attire, and the exclusion of women. Each brother vowed to uphold poverty, chastity, and obedience upon joining the order. The temple regularly summoned the brethren for chivalric duties, providing each with 1 horse, eventually augmented to 3, and a few attendants. In the absence of the temple, the recitation of paternosters supplanted the auditory experience of the offices. Both knights and servants were under Hugues' authority, with the entire order accountable to the Patriarch of Jerusalem. Following deliberation, under Bernard's oversight, the council formulated what is referred to as the Latin Rule of the Templars, derived from the rule articulated by Hugues in his address. It comprised 73 provisions and governed every facet of Templar existence. Alongside maintaining existing observances, the Latin rule instructed the brethren on the admission of newcomers to the order, detailing the vetting process before their swearing in. The appropriate age for entry, with boys advised to wait until they could bear arms. The duration of service, typically a fixed term before permitting a return to secular life. The procedures for reprimanding transgressors, and the offenses warranting expulsion from the order, including desertion from the battlefield, unauthorized departure from a castle, and similar infractions. Knights donned white habits to represent virginity and purity, whereas sergeants and squires wore brown or black attire. It is essential to acknowledge that most Templars were not knights, but rather participants in the complex support network in the West, facilitating their ongoing military obligations in the East. The Brethren's attire and their horses' bridles were to be modest, eschewing fashionable elements such as pointed laced shoes and long hair. The regulation mandated short hair styled in a monk's tonsure, and beards were obligatory. 2 meals were served daily, at noon and twilight, conducted communally and in silence, interrupted solely by a scripture reading. They consumed beef thrice weekly. No one was permitted to leave the table unless there was a commotion among the horses or an imminent assault. The order prohibited physical interactions with women, but permitted married men to engage in such relations with their spouse's agreement. Homosexuality was regarded as a graver offense, equivalent to the homicide of a fellow Christian. Superfluous conversation was prohibited, and members were anticipated to utilize their leisure time to keep horses, equipment, and attire, or to engage in prayer. The fathers assembled in Troyes possessed considerable ecclesiastical experience, but required additional campaigning in Outremer. Consequently, the rule was predominantly monastic rather than military, principally focused on the spiritual well-being of the order's members. The text concedes to the physical conditions in the East by permitting the brothers to don linen shirts in the summer, as opposed to the traditional European woolen attire. The 1160s and 1260s would subsequently address the deficiencies in the original 1129 rule. At the time of the order's collapse, the rule had expanded to encompass 686 provisions. Daily life in a Templar preceptory closely resembled that of a Western monastery. In the summer months, the day began with matins at 4 a.m., with the recital of 13 paternosters. At 6 a.m., the division bell summoned the brethren to prepare for the inaugural Mass of the day. The initial Mass occurred at 8 a.m., succeeded by the second at 11:30 a.m., followed by the day's inaugural dinner. The knights often dined first, succeeded by the sergeants. The supper was served at 2 p.m. and vespers at 6 p.m. Following the evening repast, individuals would recite the concluding prayer of the day, referred to as compline, at approximately 8 p.m. The reduced daylight hours in winter resulted in a contraction of the schedule, guaranteeing that matins commenced after dawn and compline aligned with dusk's arrival. Upon Hugues de Payen's return to Outremer following the Council of Troyes, he assumed leadership of an order that had significantly elevated its status. Nevertheless, the Church did not universally embrace the Templars. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the Church experienced substantial changes initiated by Pope Gregory VII, 1073-85, resulting in the founding of institutions like Cluny and Citeaux. The reformers of Bernard's day and earlier generations emphasized spiritual purity free from political influence, particularly violence. They endeavored to preserve a separation between secular kingship and spiritual affairs. Henry of Huntingdon characterized the amalgamation of monk and soldier as a novel monstrosity, but Guigo, the prior of La Grande Chartreuse, cautioned Hugues about the perils of conflating military and monastic roles. Attacking external adversaries is only beneficial if we first subdue internal foes. Let us cleanse our souls of vices and, subsequently, our lands of the barbarians. Guigo urged Hugues to disseminate the letter among all the brethren and dispatched it twice through separate couriers to guarantee that at least one copy arrived at its destination. A letter from this period is directed to Templar brethren and attributed to a Hugues. However, it has never been substantiated that it was written by Hugues de Payen. The author refers to himself as Hugo Peccator, or Hugh, the sinner, maybe indicating the theologian Hugh of St. Victor's authorship. Irrespective of origin, the letter demonstrates that external criticism of the order has permeated its ranks. The letter commences with, "We have received reports that some among you have been disturbed by individuals lacking discernment," and thereafter raises caution. Hugo refers to the brothers as brethren of the devil and all his works. He underscores the need for the brothers to be cognizant of their internal condition and accept their situation, stressing the importance of striving for redemption. Whether Hugues de Payen authored the Hugo Peccator letter is uncertain. However, he recognized its existence and persistently urged Bernard of Clairvaux to compose a defense of the order, obviously seeking a conclusive resolution to the matter. Bernard, now the order's foremost advocate, did not fail to deliver. His essay, In Praise of the New Knighthood, differentiates between the traditional secular knighthood that has prevailed since the era of Charlemagne and the contemporary monastic knighthood exemplified by the Templars. In doing so, Bernard opposed the trajectory of Gregory VII's reforms. He contended that knighthood was congruent with monasticism. The knight's obligation was to slay for Christ, eliminating evil rather than its perpetrators. He contended that a distinction existed between homicide, killing deemed a sin, and malicide, the eradication of malevolence, which was not considered sinful. According to Bernard, one could achieve salvation by dying for Christ and killing for him. A more succinct rationale supporting holy war would be challenging to conceive. Despite the criticisms directed at the order following the victory at Troyes, such disapproval did not hinder the nobles' eagerness to assist the struggle against the infidels. Baldwin's assault on Damascus in November 1129 included numerous Templars and many individuals that Hugues had enlisted during his European campaign. The expedition approached within 6 miles of Damascus before a splinter group led by William of Bures deemed it an opportune moment for looting. William relinquished control of the group, and Damascene's cavalry assaulted them. Only 45 individuals survived. Baldwin aimed to ambush the Damascenes, who were commemorating their triumph over the Franks, but, as his forces readied for an assault, inclement weather rendered the roads untraversable, necessitating the abandonment of the operation. The unsuccessful assault on Damascus did not negatively impact the Templars. Donations, historically comprising grants of land and structures, together with their inhabitants, and the entitlement to their profits, persisted and intensified throughout the order's existence. Typically, the motivations for donations were to validate the donor's piety, akin to how affluent merchants or esteemed individuals may commission the construction of a chapel to absolve their sins and secure favorable standing in the hereafter. The Templars encountered an abundance of penitents seeking to atone for their crimes. Alfonso I, the Battler, bequeathed the entirety of the Kingdom of Aragon to the Templars, the Knights Hospitaller, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem in his testament, constituting the most substantial bequest in October 1131. Under Alfonso, Aragon had experienced fast expansion from 1118, resulting in significant territorial gains that strained his resources. Muslim soldiers invaded the Iberian Peninsula in 711, but the Christian counteroffensive, the Reconquista, commenced almost immediately. In 722, an alliance of Visigoths and Asturians triumphed over a Muslim army at Covadonga, unaware that the reclamation of the peninsula for Christianity would need years of conflict. Alfonso's strategy for managing his newly expanded territories involved the formation of knightly confraternities to defend against potential Muslim reconquest. The orders he instituted between 1122 and 1130, including those of Belchite and Monreal del Campo, resembled the Templars in that the members served for a predetermined duration without the obligation of monastic vows. The proposal failed as the Order of Monreal del Campo nearly disintegrated when Alfonso composed his testament. The optimal strategy was to depend on military directives from the east. Furthermore, Alfonso was without offspring, rendering the kingdom's consolidation an even greater imperative. Following Alfonso's demise in 1134, the execution of his will required 9 years due to the considerable complexity associated with the distribution of extensive landholdings. Although inheriting slightly less than Alfonso had first planned, the Templars retained extensive territories throughout his old kingdom. Subsequently, the Templars would largely supplant Alfonso's defunct orders and emerge as a significant power in the Reconquista against Islamic armies. Following Alfonso's demise, the Templars commenced acquiring castles in Outremer. The initial Templar fortifications were situated north of Antioch in an area referred to as the Emmanus March, rather than within the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Templars protected the Belen Pass, a mountainous area linking the Principality of Antioch to Cilician Armenia. Initially, they acquired Bagras, renamed Gaston, followed by Darbsac, La Roche-de-Roussel, and Roche-Guillaume. Simultaneously, the order acquired Port Bonel to the southwest of these fortifications, granting them maritime access. The Templars consistently fortified locations of significant strategic importance, such as Bargas in border areas like the Emmanus March. In light of the persistent circumstances in the east, nearly all Templar possessions were fortified, regardless of whether they were castles. Conversely, in the west, the majority of Templar preceptories were unfortified, as they were located in non-hostile regions with exceptions on the Iberian Peninsula, where the threat of Moorish aggression was imminent, and in Eastern Europe, where military orders engaged in campaigns against indigenous pagans. The continuous influx of wealth and assets into the temple's treasury mitigated internal and external uncertainties regarding the Templars' purpose, efficacy, and ethics. Consequently, the 3 papal bulls, named after the bullum, or seal, affixed to the parchment, obtained by Robert de Craon, the second Grand Master, elevated the order beyond any official censure except the papacy itself. Commentators persisted in criticizing the Templars. Nonetheless, the bulls elevated them beyond such reproach. Beginning in 1139, as they solidified their foothold in the Emmanus March, the Templars attained invincibility not witnessed since the Council of Troy. While originating from Anjou, Robert de Craon, referred to as Robert the Burgundian, replaced Hugues de Payen as Grand Master following the latter's death on 24th of May, perhaps in 1136. He was an adept administrator and saw that only papal powers would ensure the consolidation of the advantages achieved at Troy. 3 years later, he obtained precisely that from Pope Innocent II. The bull Omni Datum Optimum, issued at the Lateran on 29th of March 1139, rendered the Templars accountable solely to the Pope. The bull validated the order's rule and all contributions. The bull also outlined the operations of the order, permitting the Templars to elect their own master without external intervention, and stipulating that alterations to the order's customs and observances could only occur after consulting the chapter of brothers, which functioned as the governing council of each preceptory. It additionally prevented the brothers from pledging fealty to anybody outside the order, and forbade any professed brother from re-entering the secular realm or affiliating with another order. The bull exempted the Templars from tithes, but allowed them to receive them as gifts from clergy and lay people, a privilege once reserved for the Cistercians. In addition to permitting the order to retain all plunder seized from the Muslims, the remainder of the decree pertained to the order's spiritual existence. The Templars might enlist clerks and priests to serve the order, contingent upon obtaining the bishop's assent. The Pope has the authority to overrule the bishop in case of refusal. The order maintained the authority to dismiss a priest if he created disruptions within the order, or demonstrated greater detriment than benefit contingent upon chapter approval. Nevertheless, a priest could reintegrate into the order after a year of service if the brothers consented. The priest's exclusive duty was to tend to the brothers' souls rather than participate in warfare. Any bishop had the authority to ordain Templar priests who were not accountable to any entity outside the order. Moreover, the master must establish a prior arrangement before permitting the order's clergy to preach for remuneration. The master authorized the Templars to build oratories on their territory and to conduct divine services therein. The Templars could enter their serving brethren there upon their demise. The brothers could obtain confession from any priest and receive any sacrament or unction wherever they traveled. The Templars' household and enslaved people were also afforded the rights specified in Omni Datum Optimum. The bull finished with Innocent, citing 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 20. Each of you should remain in the vocation to which you are called. Celestine II and Eugenius III, his successors, reaffirmed the privileges conferred upon the Templars by Innocent. Pope Celestine issued Milites Templi in 1144, explicitly addressing the clergy. The letter characterized the Templars as guardians of pilgrims and protectors of the Church against pagans, leading the clergy to initiate a collection for the Templars. Celestine encouraged benefactors to establish confraternities to assist the order, promising those who joined would receive a remission of 1/7 of their penance. Additionally, members of the confraternities were entitled to burial within churches, provided they had not been excommunicated. The Templars would open the churches once annually to gather the confraternity's revenues, during which they would listen to the prayers. In the subsequent year, the Templars once more communicated with the Church through Militia Dei, a document that conferred more liberties upon them. Eugenius pledged to uphold their rights and permitted the Templars to enlist priests. Before administering the order, the priests had to complete formal ordination and secure approval from their bishop. The brothers may receive tithes and burial contributions, construct oratories, and enter their brothers and servants upon death at any location where they own a dwelling. Eugenius requested the clergy to consecrate Templar oratories, sanctify their graves, and permit their priests to operate without disturbance. The three bulls validated the Templars and solidified their position at the core of Christendom's endeavors in the Holy Land. Despite ongoing criticism of the order, the Templars remained impervious. The Templars significantly rose in status, transforming from a somewhat dubious organization of uncertain origins at the Council of Troyes to the protectors of the one true faith within just 15 years. Their dominance would continue unchallenged for the subsequent century and a half. Few could have anticipated their eventual decline to be as rapid as their ascent. A church exists within a church, and a state exists within a state, 1145-1291. The Second Crusade. The Second Crusade, 1147-49, assessed the extent to which the Templars had solidified their position following the Council of Troy and the issuance of 3 significant bulls of privilege. On Christmas Eve, 1144, the city of Edessa succumbed to an army led by Imad ad-Din Zengi, the Atabeg of Mosul and Aleppo. Upon receiving the news the subsequent autumn, Pope Eugenius III promptly corresponded with King Louis VII of France, beseeching him to spearhead a fresh crusade to liberate Edessa from the infidels. At that time, Louis was disfavored in France because of his unlawful appropriation of territories belonging to his most formidable vassal, Theobald of Champagne, which had ignited a conflict 3 years prior. He was astonished when none of his lords demonstrated interest in his idea for a new expedition to the east. A conference in Vézelay, Burgundy, during Easter 1146 addressed the issue. Recognizing his possible isolation, Louis sought the one individual capable of mobilizing prospective crusaders, Bernard of Clairvaux. The gathering at Vézelay on 31st March 1146 mirrored that at Clermont in 1095, as vast masses assembled, attracted by the opportunity to listen to Bernard advocate for the crusade. A multitude had congregated in Vézelay, necessitating Bernard to deliver his sermon from a specially erected platform on the town's periphery. Bernard's remarks resonated with the audience. Immediately upon concluding his speech, King Louis was the first to vow fealty, succeeded by his brother Robert, the Count of Dreux. Among those who pledged to travel east that day, many were the descendants of the original Crusaders, for whom preserving familial honor was as significant as the liberation of Edessa. The triumph of Vézelay resulted in the abandonment of villages and towns, as Bernard subsequently communicated to King Louis. You will encounter widows whose husbands are still living in various locations. On 27 April 1147, a chapter meeting of the Paris Temple convened to receive King Louis and Pope Eugenius in anticipation of the Crusades' departure. Additionally, 4 archbishops, 130 Templar knights, and an equal number of Templar sergeants and squires were present. Eugenius designated Aymar, the Templar treasurer, to collect the tax he levied on all church assets to fund the crusade. William of Tyre, the renowned chronicler writing a generation later, posited that it was during this assembly that the Pope granted the Templars the privilege of donning a red cross on their white mantles, symbolizing their readiness to endure martyrdom in the defense of the Holy Land against the infidel. Germany was infused with crusading fervor after King Conrad III listened to Bernard's sermon in the Rhineland. Eugenius first sought Conrad's aid in combating his primary foe, the Norman King Roger of Sicily. Nevertheless, because of Conrad's steadfast dedication to the crusade, it was resolved that he would command a German contingent to cooperate with the French forces. During the overland route of the First Crusade, Everard de Bar, the master of the Temple in France, and the knights present at the April chapter meeting joined the French army led by Louis. Everard established himself as one of Louis's most trusted advisors, prompting the French king to dispatch the Templar master to Constantinople to negotiate the Crusades' transit through Byzantine territory. In contrast to his predecessor Alexius, Byzantine Emperor Manuel Comnenus did not solicit assistance from the West and was rather apprehensive about the impending arrival of the crusading force, predominantly composed of French and German forces, encroaching onto his territories. Everard adeptly commanded the Crusaders, yet the Franks regarded Manuel with profound distrust, owing to his endorsement of a peace pact with the Seljuk Turks to combat Roger of Sicily. Manuel was apprehensive of the Crusaders and relieved to see them depart. In January 1148, the crusade encountered additional challenges. Disheartened by inclement weather and the report of Conrad's army, which had advanced ahead of the French and faced defeat at Dorylaeum by the Seljuk Turks, the French were assaulted in the constricted passages of the Cadmus Mountains. The Franks' heavy cavalry proved ineffective in this terrain, while the Crusader columns faced relentless assaults from the Turkish light infantry, whose archers excelled at shooting from horseback. An acute scarcity of horses and supplies further impeded the Franks, potentially concluding the crusade before they arrived in Outremer. Louis once more sought the counsel of Everard de Bars and the Templars. Everard divided the troops into units of 50, each led by a Templar, who were subsequently accountable to another Templar knight, Brother Gilbert. This gave the embattled French the morale and organization to advance to the Byzantine port of Italia, where Louis transported his finest troops by boat to Antioch. The crusade encountered an additional setback at Antioch. Louis had nearly depleted his resources to transport the army across Asia Minor. Once more, he sought assistance from Everard de Bars. On 10th May, Everard departed from Antioch to Acre, where he secured adequate funds to finance the remainder of the crusade by either accessing the treasury at the Templar preceptory in Acre or borrowing against the order's assets as collateral. Regardless of the circumstances, it demonstrated that the Templars had evolved into a significant financial institution, solidifying the alliance between the order and the French crown, resulting in the Templars functioning as the royal treasury of France until the late 13th century. The Templars assumed a diminished role in the subsequent phases of the Crusade. In June, Templar Grand Master Robert de Craon and Hospital Grand Master Raymond Dupuy gathered a war council in Acre to determine a strategic line of action. The Crusaders ultimately resolved to pursue Damascus, planning an assault for the subsequent month after deliberating whether to proceed to Edessa via Aleppo or to advance toward Ascalon in the south. Following initial success in besieging the city from the west, the Crusaders committed a tactical error by relocating east of the city. In contrast to its adequately supplied original position, this new eastern location was devoid of water and confronted the most guarded segment of the city walls. Amidst rumors of a formidable Muslim force led by Nur ed-Din, the son of Zengi, who died in 1146, the Crusaders faltered and withdrew. The Second Crusade concluded, and the blame for its failure commenced. Numerous theories existed on the reasons for the Second Crusade's failure. Allegations of betrayal proliferated, implicating several groups as the primary offenders. The Crusaders, unacquainted with Eastern society, were astonished at the extent to which Christians in Outremer had adopted Eastern customs, leading numerous Western observers to perceive the men of Jerusalem as culpable. John of Würzburg, a German monk who journeyed to Outremer in the 1160s, contended that the crusade was thwarted by Templar treachery. The Würzburg annalist, an unknown associate of John, said that the Damascenes had compensated the Templars to terminate the siege. Subsequently, it was discovered that the funds received by the orders were counterfeit, interpreted as divine retribution for their betrayal of the Christian cause. Alternative narrative versions see the men of Jerusalem accepting the funds, whilst the early 13th century chronicle by Ernoul and Bernard the Treasurer illustrates the Hospitallers collaborating with the Templars in prioritizing profit over divine considerations. Nevertheless, William of Tyre, the most ardent opponent of the military orders during that period, does not reference the Templars or the Hospitallers concerning the Crusade's failure. Several decades later, the unfavorable publicity surrounding the orders suggests that the chroniclers were extrapolating contemporary disenchantment with both the temple and the hospital back to 1148. Considering the Templars' significant involvement in financing the Second Crusade, it is vital to investigate the order's influence on the financial matters of both Outremer and the West, and the ensuing supremacy they established over developing a worldwide banking system. The Temple as financial institutions. Early in their history, the Templars established a reputation as dependable financiers. They were essentially the inaugural Bank of Europe. They established a credit note system that permitted the withdrawal of funds from one Templar preceptory to another upon presenting a credit note. The placed funds were secure as Templar fortifications were robust structures. For example, several castles in Outremer were so well fortified that they were impregnable, like the substantial fortification at Atlit, which was a fortified peninsula rather than a simple castle. In Europe, the formidable structure of the Paris Temple established its financial foundation, with the London Temple serving a lesser role in the same capacity. The Templar loans salvaged Louis VII's finances from ruin. Nonetheless, the magnitude of the loan nearly precipitated the order's insolvency. The order is thought to have provided him with 2,000 marks of silver and 30,000 livres parisis. Compared to the profits from French royal domains, even 2 decades post-Second Crusade, the sum is approximately 60,000 livres parisis annually. Louis VII was one of many French rulers who depended on the order's financial services. The Second Crusade marked the inception of a prolonged alliance between the order and the French monarchy. During the reign of Philip II, 1180–1223, the Templars functioned as the French royal treasury. Throughout his reign, they augmented the profits from royal estates by 120% and played a significant role in Philip's reorganization of Capetian finances. During the 13th century, the king consistently appointed the Templar treasurer in Paris, who became a trusted counselor to Philip and his successors. Louis IX, the great-grandson of Louis, was taken hostage during the calamity of the Seventh Crusade in 1250. The French commanders sought the temple for the additional 30,000 livres required for his release, a job that Templar commander Stephen of Autrecourt was reluctant to pursue. The Templars excelled as bankers due to their thorough record-keeping and client impartiality. Documentation from the Paris temple spans from 12th of March 1295 to 4th July of the subsequent year, demonstrating the temple's active role as a financial institution. These documents, 8 extant sheets of parchment, document the date and the Templar on duty, the deposited amount, the depositor, the designated account for the funds, and the source of the cash. The Templar would transport the accumulated receipts to the strong chambers for deposit after each day. During the 1260s and 1270s, the order erected a substantial tower to house its diverse monetary assets. Over 60 active accounts existed at the Paris Temple, comprising account holders from the monarchy, clergy, significant nobility, and Templar officials. Business transactions were prohibited on Christmas, Easter, Ascension, and the feast days of significant saints, such as John the Baptist for the order. Beyond these days, the operational hours of the temple were primarily dictated by the requirements of its clientele. In August 1295, they operated for merely 6 days, while in December, their activity increased significantly, remaining open for 11 consecutive days. The Paris Temple issued statements to significant clients multiple times annually, outlining the transactions in their accounts. Nonetheless, as the chronicler Joinville learned to his detriment during the Seventh Crusade, circumstances occasionally deteriorated. As the soldiers recuperated in Acre after King Louis's ransom, Joinville was awarded 400 livres in salary. He retained 40 and placed the rest 360 with the Templars. Upon dispatching one of his men to retrieve an additional 40 for sustenance, the Templar treasurer professed complete ignorance regarding Joinville and his funds. Joinville subsequently expressed his grievances to the newly appointed Grand Master, Reginald de Vichier, who was originally skeptical of Joinville's claim that the treasurer had misappropriated his funds. Following an investigation, Reginald informed a relieved Joinville that he had located his funds, resulting in the treasurer's relocation from Acre. The papacy became reliant on the Templars for their financial requirements. By 1163, Pope Alexander III, 1159-1181, depended on the Templars for banking services. After their participation in the restructuring of Capuchin finances under Philip II, Pope Innocent III employed the order to reorganize crusading finances during the Fourth Crusade, 1202-1204. The clergy were required to remit a new tax to Templar and Hospitaller preceptories to finance the wars in the East, with the military orders tasked with securely transferring the funds to the Holy Land. Honorius III employed a comparable method to procure finances for the Fifth Crusade, 1218-21, allocating the monies to the papal legate in Egypt. Monarchs from foreign nations similarly visited the temple. The monarchs of Aragon were significant borrowers, and King Henry II of England, 1154-89, utilized the order to amass funds for crusades in Jerusalem, while his brother, King John, 1199-1216, borrowed various amounts, ranging from 9 marks of gold for a penance following his excommunication in 1213 to loans exceeding 4,000 marks 2 years later to remunerate troops in Poitou and Gascony. In 1261, amidst his conflicts with the barons, Henry III, 1216-72, son of John, transferred the crown jewels to the Paris Temple for security, cataloging, and storage until further instructions were issued. The subsequent notification arrived 3 years later, when Henry utilized them as collateral for a loan to fund additional campaigns against the barons. Nevertheless, the Templars' financial activities encompassed more than merely providing loans to royalty and nobles. The Templars took valuable documents and items for storage, including wills, as crusaders and pilgrims could be absent from Europe for several years. Pierre Sarrasin executed his will in June 1220 before his journey to Santiago de Compostela, exemplifying this practice. He stipulated that should he not return, the Templars were to remit 600 livres parisis to the Abbey of St. Victor, which was to be utilized to acquire corn rents. The annual yield from this investment, approximately 200 livres parisis, was designated for daily bread donations. Additionally, other beneficiaries were included, notably his mother, who was to receive 100 livres. The Templars retained possession of the estate until Pierre's heirs reached maturity. The framework of the order. As the temple transitioned from the initial 9 soldier monks committed to poverty, chastity, and obedience into what is now perceived as a worldwide enterprise, the order's structure likewise evolved to accommodate and facilitate its increasing involvement in the affairs of the Crusader states. The Grand Master held supreme authority over the order. Following the bull Omni Datum Optimum of 1139, he was accountable solely to the Pope, a 13-member electoral college of senior Templars comprising 8 knights, 4 sergeants, and 1 chaplain, selected Grand Masters. The electoral college would seek to select an individual already situated in the East. The Paris Temple's significance to the French monarchy allowed French kings to influence the selection of a Grand Master, as seen by the election of Reginald de Vichier in 1250. With the order's expansion, the accoutrements of office also increased. During Bertrand de Blanquefort's term, 1156-69, a Grand Master could anticipate possessing 4 horses and an entourage consisting of 2 knights, a sergeant, a priest, a turcopolier, a farrier, a chef, and a Saracen secretary. The master had the primary selection whenever the order acquired a new shipment of horses from the west. A cadre of senior officials positioned directly beneath the Grand Master. The seneschal served as both the subordinate and advisor to the Grand Master. At times, the dynamics of electoral college politics permitted seneschals such as André de Montbard, one of Hugues de Payen's initial knights, to ascend to Grand Master. André de Montbard ascended to the position of Grand Master in 1153, after serving as seneschal for 4 years, after the violent and sudden conclusion of Bernard de Tremollay's brief tenure at Ascalon. Similar to the Grand Master, the seneschal possessed his own personnel. The marshal held authority over all military decisions, including procuring horses and weapons, and exercised jurisdiction over the provincial commanders. The commander of the Kingdom of Jerusalem served as the order's treasurer, administered the kingdom, and possessed equivalent authority to the Grand Master. The commander of Jerusalem, who governed solely the city, possessed equivalent authority to that of the Grand Master inside its confines. The commanders of Tripoli, Acre, and Antioch possessed analogous authority. Each prominent kingdom in the West with a notable Templar presence had a master accountable to the Grand Master. France, England, Aragon, Portugal, Poitou, Apulia, and Hungary. The draper oversaw the distribution of clothing and bedding, ensuring that individual brothers refrained from accumulating personal possessions. He possessed the right to allocate gifts bestowed upon the order. The diverse masters and commanders seemed to fulfill alternative functions. The commander of houses oversaw specific Templar houses in the East and reported to higher authorities. The commander of knights served as the deputy to the commander of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The turcopolier managed the turcoples, local light cavalry recruited for fixed terms. The under-marshal supervised the foot soldiers and their equipment. The standard-bearer, typically a sergeant, was responsible for the conduct of the squires, and the infirmary cared for sick and elderly brothers, often relocating them to the order's western houses, away from the front lines of Outremer and the Iberian Peninsula. The Templar fighting forces elite consisted of the knights, easily envisioned when considering the order, adorned with white mantles featuring the iconic red cross over the heart. Before entering the order, individuals are anticipated to possess proficiency in martial disciplines, relinquish their civilian attire, and be provided with armor, gear, and garments for non-combat situations. Initially, knights may originate from any social class, including excommunicates, owing to the persistent demand for labor in the East. By the Second Crusade, knights were mandated to originate from noble lineage. Each knight was allocated 3 horses and a squire, whose responsibility was to assist the knight and ensure his preparedness for combat. Like Turcopoles, squires were not fully initiated Templars, but were frequently local individuals employed for a specified duration. The other principal faction of combatant Templars consisted of the sergeants who, in contrast to the knights, donned black or brown mantles and were less strongly equipped. In contrast to the knights, sergeants sprang from a more diverse class and racial background and frequently included individuals of Armenian and Syrian descent among their ranks. A horse and squire were necessary. Notwithstanding the significant defeat of the Second Crusade, the Christian presence in Outremer remained proactive. The sole coastal city retained by Muslims was Ascalon, surrounded by a series of fortifications to contain it. In the winter of 1149-50, King Baldwin III granted the Templars control of Gaza, located around 12 miles to the south. The city lay predominantly in ruins, and the Templars constructed the fort, the inaugural significant stronghold granted to the order in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Egyptian army, now incapable of supplying Ascalon via land, attempted to recapture Gaza shortly after the Templars seized the city. The endeavor was unsuccessful. The siege of Ascalon commenced on 25th of January 1153, culminating in the summer. On the night of 15th of August, a contingent of defenders from the city ignited the Franks' mobile siege tower. The wind shifted direction and propelled the flames toward the city walls. The subsequent fire resulted in a section of the wall collapsing, prompting a Templar detachment led by Grand Master Bernard de Tremblay to surge into the opening. William of Tyre, the chronicler, notes that Bernard prohibited non-Templars from accessing the city due to the Templars' avarice for plunder. The Templars made an unsuccessful defense in the city and displayed their decapitated remains over the walls of Ascalon the next day. No Muslim sources document this event, and it is plausible that William was expressing his customary anger. Instead of seeking plunder, Bernard and his men may have died attempting to maintain the breach in the wall. In either scenario, the city fell a week later, signifying the onset of the Templars' notoriety for greed. To commentators in both Outremer and the West, what appeared to be a greedy disposition in the Order of the Temple was, in several instances, simply a misinterpretation of the Order's meticulous management of its properties. Following Hugues de Payen's visit from 1127 to 1129, the territory granted to them in the West was the foundation of the Order's affluence. Malcolm Barber observed, "Without a comprehensive support network in the West, the Templars would have disappeared following their first significant setback." Hugues de Payen's journey facilitated the early establishment of their European preceptories via a substantial fundraising initiative. A Templar preceptory often comprised an estate, such as a farm or manor, which would create a network of affiliated daughter houses nearby. The mother and daughter homes allocated all their profits to campaigning in the East. The order instituted a levy termed the responsibility, allocating 1/3 of all profits accrued from a Templar house in the West to finance its endeavors in the Holy Land. Typically, these Western establishments positioned themselves in major towns, financial hubs, and European ports. Templars were present wherever trade occurred, The preceptories financed the order and provided sustenance, clothing, weaponry, and equines. The Templars' growing significance in the East rendered the efforts of the Western houses even more crucial for maintaining a steady supply for the order. Amid escalating prices in the 13th century, the preceptories were responsible for continuously overseeing their finances and persistently seeking innovative revenue-generating methods. Consequently, the order's assets comprised agricultural land, wine production facilities, orchards, and tile manufacturing plants. To secure further support, the Templars established an affiliate membership that allowed individuals, upon making a gift, to attend Mass in a Templar church and obtain burial rights in a Templar cemetery. The Templars sometimes granted these benefactors a stipend when no other assistance was available. Most of the Templars' 9,000 Western manors were in France, with a lesser presence in Italy. Although the order possessed land in Germany, that region was predominantly under the jurisdiction of the Teutonic Knights. Similarly, despite their significant participation in the Reconquista, the Templars typically maintained a less conspicuous presence on the Iberian Peninsula than the notable Spanish and Portuguese orders Calatrava, Santiago, and Alcantara. The order built its headquarters in the London Temple in England, distributing its assets from Penzance and the island of Lundy in the Bristol Channel to Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. The order often held any contemporary English location name that began with the prefix Temple. The treachery of the men of Jerusalem and the military commands contributed to the defeat of the Second Crusade. The Crusaders led by Louis VII were astonished by the extent to which the Latins in Outremer had embraced Eastern customs, oblivious that in numerous instances the assimilation of local practices was the most pragmatic course of action. The culture of the Arab world was more sophisticated than most crusaders in the West. The Franks utilized Syrian physicians, chefs, domestic workers, artisans, and laborers. They adorned themselves in Eastern attire and incorporated the region's fruits and cuisine into their diets. Their residences included glass windows, floor mosaics, and fountains in the courtyards, all constructed by the Syrian design. They showcased dancers at their entertainment events, employed professional mourners for funerals, bathed, utilized soap, and ingested sweets. Furthermore, the Franks in Outremer had access to fresh produce year-round, including fruits and vegetables unfamiliar in Europe, such as peaches, olives, and bananas. Nonetheless, there were more significant practical considerations. Despite Jerusalem being under Christian control, the majority of the inhabitants continued to be Muslim. Although regarded as second-class citizens, unless they converted, they possessed the autonomy to choose their community leaders, and their Christian overlords showed a degree of tolerance provided they fulfilled their tax obligations punctually. Likewise, the Jewish community saw minimal harassment, a stark contrast to the atrocities inflicted upon both groups during the First Crusade. The Templars showed remarkable tolerance towards Islam. Grand Masters routinely utilized Saracen secretaries, while Templars often developed proficiency in Arabic. A Muslim diplomat was granted a tiny chapel for worship during his visit to the Templars in Jerusalem. As Frank endeavored to intervene, the Templars removed him, permitting the ambassador to pray undisturbed towards Mecca. The Templars had a less amicable relationship with the assassins. They were a zealous sect of Shiite Muslims that seceded in the late 11th century from the Fatimids, the predominant Shiite authority, establishing themselves in the Elburz mountains of northern Persia and subsequently in the mountains of Lebanon. Their leader became known to the Franks as the Old Man of the Mountains. The Shiites held strong messianic and mystical beliefs, anticipating the arrival of the Mahdi, the Guided One, who would annihilate tyranny and establish paradise. They pursued their objectives through an erratic campaign of terror, employing assassin killers to eliminate their adversaries in audacious, occasionally suicidal attacks. They derive their name from hashishim, a term for those who consume hashish, which was believed to render the user impervious to danger. Their victims were often Muslims from the principal rival sect of Islam, the Sunnis, or even other Shiite factions. Amalric, 1162-74, the king of Jerusalem, attempted to negotiate an alliance with the assassins in 1173, believing the old man of the mountains was on the verge of converting to Christianity. This was perhaps not as ludicrous as it may sound, as the old man had, just a few years earlier, abrogated the law of the prophet and proclaimed the millennium, thus making himself and the rest of the sect heretical. The Templars were less certain about the old man's threatened apostasy, and a group of Templar knights ambushed Abdullah, the old man's envoy, near Tripoli and killed him. Amalric was furious, and commentators such as William of Tyre and Walter Map seized upon the opportunity to launch another attack on the greed of the temple. In their view, the order was afraid of losing its annual tribute of 2,000 besants that the assassins paid to the Templars to leave them largely alone. The Grand Master, Odo de Saint-Amand, declined to surrender the assassin, a one-eyed knight named Walter of Mesnil, arguing that Innocent's powerful bull of 1139 elevated the Templars beyond the authority of the Jerusalem throne, and he planned to dispatch Walter to Rome for resolution. Amalric ignored this, seized Walter at Sidon, where the Templar chapter was in session, and imprisoned him. Amalric convinced the old man that the Templars had been operating independently, but he abandoned all efforts to form an alliance with the assassins. The incident illustrated the Templars' readiness to confront a potentially allied Muslim faction and the King of Jerusalem himself, if required. The motive for the murder remains ambiguous. Considering the order's affluence at this juncture, it is improbable that the Templars feared the loss of their tribute. Perhaps they were acutely aware of their inability to fully trust the assassins, prompting a dissident Templar faction led by Walter of Mesnil to take unilateral action. The affair of the assassin envoy illustrates the degree to which the order had attained autonomy from all authority except the Pope. Critics, decrying the privileges enjoyed by the Templars, alleged that they had evolved into a church within a church, a state within a state. Nevertheless, the order appeared impervious to such censure, and the Templars' construction initiatives in the East imply that this only reinforced their conviction of divine distinction. Templar Masons constructed numerous churches across Latin Syria and participated in significant projects, including establishing the new Church of the Holy Sepulchre, consecrated in 1149, and refurbishing the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Furthermore, they created an ornate tomb for Baldwin IV, the leper king, following his demise in 1185. Their architectural endeavors in the West typically featured simpler churches and structures, reserving substantial expenditures for prominent preceptories such as those in Paris and London. Additionally, not all of their churches exhibit the characteristic round designs exemplified by the Temple Church in London, inspired by the Temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. Like Temple Garway in Herefordshire, regional preceptories were characterized by simplicity, austerity, and functionality. The other significant achievement of Templar architecture in the East was the fortifications, which were either enhanced, reconstructed, or specifically built for them. Castles such as Safad in Galilee, Tortosa in the county of Tripoli, and Atlit along the coast south of Haifa exemplified medieval military architecture. Notably, the fortifications at Atlit were remarkably robust. Its outer walls measured 15 ft, 4.5 meters, in thickness, allowing them to endure a substantial assault during their construction. The Templars were significantly engaged in construction endeavors from their establishment. In the 1120s, King Baldwin II granted the Templars autonomy to enhance the Al-Aqsa Mosque according to their preferences. Theodoric, a German monk who traveled to the Holy Land from 1169 to 1174, documented a comprehensive description of the temple precinct. To the south of the Dome of the Rock, now called the Temple of the Lord following the First Crusade, lies the Palace of Solomon, known as Al-Aqsa. Like a church, this structure is oblong, supported by columns, and culminates in a large circular roof at the sanctuary's end, resembling ecclesiastical architecture. The Templar soldiers have acquired this palace and its adjacent edifices, establishing a garrison within these and other controlled structures. Stocked with the arms, clothing, and provisions, they remain perpetually prepared to safeguard the province. King Solomon previously constructed stables adjacent to the palace lace that featured an intricate design. These stables, built with vaults, arches, and roofs, are estimated to accommodate 10,000 horses and their attendants. A single crossbow shot would scarcely traverse the length or breadth of this building. The upper region has residences, structures, and ancillary buildings serving diverse functions. It features multiple pedestrian pathways, lawns, municipal chambers, porches, consistories, and water reserves housed in splendid cisterns. The lower region is similarly populated with restrooms, retail establishments, grain storage rooms, wood repositories, and assorted domestic provisions. On the western side of the palace, Templars have erected a new edifice that exceeds local architectural norms in height, length, and breadth, including its cellars, refectories, staircase, and roof. The elevation of its roof is so extraordinary that it challenges credulity. They have constructed a new palace alongside its predecessor on the opposite side. Additionally, at the periphery of the outer court, they have established a new church of significant dimensions and artistic merit. The order was exceedingly occupied, presumably from the instant they occupied the premises, due to the necessity for repairs at the southern end of the temple platform following Baldwin's departure and the extensive Templar undertakings. When Theodoric beheld it, the temple area was at its zenith of development. However, Theodoric was oblivious that the order's stay was transient, and the newly erected church he witnessed would remain unfinished. The fall of Ascalon, after the calamity of the Second Crusade, represents a significant moment in 12th century Crusader military endeavors. The conflict between the Franks and Muslims remained in a deadlock throughout the late 1150s and into the 1160s, characterized by mutual raids and the pivotal involvement of the Templars in Christian operations. Nevertheless, a succession of developments in the 1160s prompted the Templars to embrace a more autonomous strategy in military tactics. Amalric, the 25-year-old brother of King Baldwin III, ascended to the throne following Baldwin's death at the age of 33 in 1162. Amalric focused his ambitions on Egypt and initiated a campaign against Cairo in the autumn of 1163. Amalric and Nur ed-Din perceived Egypt, beleaguered by political turmoil, as a coveted asset, each intent on preventing the other from acquiring it. The Templars, as customary, engaged in the campaign under their Grand Master, Bertrand de Blanquefort, but the Egyptians repelled the Franks by breaching the dikes in the Nile Delta. The Egyptians temporarily barred Amalric from Egypt, but he returned the subsequent year. While Amalric negotiated with Shawar, the Egyptian vizier, Nur ed-Din, launched an assault on Antioch. On 10th of August 1164, with Amalric unable to return, Prince Bohemond III's forces, which included a Templar contingent, faced Nur ed-Din's significantly larger army. Bohemond initiated an attack against the Council of Nearly All, including the Templars. Bohemond's forces were routed, resulting in the demise of 60 Templar knights, with only 7 managing to escape. Relations between the temple and the King of Jerusalem deteriorated 2 years later when Nur ed-Din's forces besieged a Templar cave fortress in Transjordan. When Amalric and his troops hurried to assist the Templars, they encountered 12 Templar knights returning across the River Jordan. The Templars claimed they were under siege and surrendered the fortress to the Muslims. Amalric's indignation prompted him to order the hanging of the Templars. When Amalric launched a full-scale invasion of Egypt in the autumn of 1168, the Templars declined to participate. 5 years after the Templars' withdrawal from the Egyptian campaign, the affair of the assassin envoy exacerbated tensions between the order and the king. The subsequent year, Amalric passed away, as did Nur ed-Din. Both rulers left behind minor heirs: Amalric's son, the 13-year-old leper Baldwin IV, and Nur ed-Din's son Malik, who was merely 11. This situation incited competing claims from the Atabegs of Damascus, Aleppo, Mosul, and Cairo, from which Outremer's most formidable adversary emerged: Saladin. After Nur ed-Din's death, Yusuf, also known as Saladin, emerged as a prominent Muslim general who successfully repelled Amalric's forces during the Egyptian campaigns of the 1160s. He forged alliances and fostered unity among the various Muslim kingdoms to continue the jihad, holy war, against the Franks. As a young man, he was primarily drawn to religion, but he eventually realized that only a holy war could drive out the Franks, which led him to become a master swordsman. Like most Muslim rulers of the time, he was also highly cultured and developed a reputation for both piety and mercy toward his enemies. Despite facing opposition from the Islamic world, he garnered respect from Muslims and Christians, and he held the fighting prowess of the Frankish knights in high regard. However, there was one segment of the Frankish population that he felt outright hatred for, perhaps because he understood how fanatical they were in their commitment to the Christian cause. He detested, possibly even feared, the military orders. Shortly thereafter, Saladin's forces engaged the Templars. In 1177, Saladin initiated an assault on Gaza, where the Templars awaited him. However, he abruptly altered his strategy and besieged Ascalon instead. Baldwin IV, having reached maturity, spearheaded a counteroffensive. With Frankish forces concentrated at Ascalon and Gaza, Saladin, reminiscent of Nur ed-Din's assault on Antioch, determined that the relatively unprotected Jerusalem was his optimal target. Baldwin discerned Saladin's intentions and pursued the Muslim army alongside a Templar contingent from Gaza. They intercepted Saladin's forces at Montgisard on 25 November 1177, decisively defeating them. Saladin narrowly escaped capture and fled to Egypt. If Montgisard had validated Saladin's apprehension regarding the military prowess of the Templars, the events of the summer of 1179 would reveal their zealous nature. Baldwin succumbed to the Templars' influence, acknowledging the region's strategic significance along the route to Damascus, and constructed a fortress at Jacob's Ford on the Jordan, a site where the Book of Genesis asserts Jacob contended with the angel. Saladin laid siege to the fortress. On 10th of June, Templar forces led by their Grand Master Odo de Saint-Amand and a Christian commander arrived. The army, commanded by Raymond of Tripoli, confronted Saladin's forces. The circumstances deteriorated for the Franks, resulting in the capture of several knights, including Odo de Saint-Amand. Typically, Nur ed-Din would have utilized a prominent Frankish noble such as Bertrand de Blanquefort, whom he had seized shortly after Blanquefort's ascension to Templar Grand Master in 1156, as leverage for negotiations. Nur ed-Din and Byzantine Emperor Manuel Comnenus formalized a treaty that liberated him after nearly 2 years of captivity. Nevertheless, Odo resolutely rejected the Franks' proposal to exchange him for a Muslim prisoner, ultimately culminating in his demise in prison in 1180. Arnold of Torroja, Odo's successor, had served as master in Spain and Provence since 1167 and was a seasoned mediator. He endeavored to unify the disparate factions in the east, fully cognizant that internal discord would significantly undermine the Christians' military strength. Saladin, both an astute politician and a formidable military leader, recognized the potential fractures among the Franks and continued to fortify his position through strategic alliances in the early 1180s, biding his time for the opportune moment to strike amidst Frankish disunity. In 1184, Arnold undertook a journey to Europe, accompanied by Roger de Moulins, Grand Master of the Hospital, and Patriarch Heraclius, to emphasize the gravity of Saladin's threat to Western leaders. Regrettably, Arnold passed away before the conclusion of the embassy, dying in Verona on 30th of September 1184, leaving Heraclius and Roger to pursue the mission independently. Gerard de Ridefort, who succeeded Arnold of Torroja as Grand Master of the Temple, was known for his recklessness, surpassing even Odo de Saint-Amand. Of Flemish or Anglo-Norman descent, he allegedly joined the order to mend a failed romance. By 1179, he was the Marshal of Jerusalem, and by 1183, he became the Seneschal. He was elected Grand Master of the Temple, likely in early 1185, coinciding with Baldwin IV's death from leprosy at 24. Despite a somewhat strained relationship with the monarchy since Amalric's reign, the Temple under Gerard became deeply entangled in the succession crisis, which ultimately proved disastrous. Baldwin's 7-year-old nephew, Baldwin V, ascended as regent. In this capacity, Raymond of Tripoli negotiated a 4-year truce with Outremer. The boy's reign lasted only a year before his demise. The Leper King's will from 1183 designated that Raymond of Tripoli would remain regent should his nephew perish before reaching the age of 10, while the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the monarchs of France and England sought a new sovereign. However, the will did not anticipate the coup of September 1186, which installed Sybil, Baldwin IV's sister, as Queen of Jerusalem alongside her husband, Guy of Lusignan. Gerard de Ridefort was a principal conspirator who helped facilitate Guy's ascension to the throne. Conversely, Roger de Moulins, the hospital master, expressed reservations regarding this ineffectual French noble assuming the title of King of Jerusalem. On Coronation Day, when it was time to unlock the strongbox for Guy's crowning, Roger discarded his key out of the window, compelling Gerard to venture outside in search of it. The individual quickly became unpopular. He was a feeble monarch whom many of Outremer's vassals regarded as a usurper. His ascension to the throne significantly intensified the factionalism among the Franks, which had contributed to his rise initially. This resulted in a critical rift between the king and his principal allies, Gerard de Ridefort and Reginald of Châtillon on one side, and the former regent, Raymond of Tripoli, on the other. Reginald was arguably even more unpopular than Guy, and for good reason. After committing atrocities in Cyprus, then under Byzantine control, Reginald mounted an expedition to relieve Syrian Christians of their cattle. Muslim forces captured him on his way back to Antioch and ransomed him. No one came forward to pay up, and Reginald remained incarcerated for the next 16 years. After his release around 1176, Reginald bravely participated in the campaigns against Saladin, but remained the Franks' unreliable ally. In 1182, he initiated a series of raids on Muslim territory from the Red Sea, targeting merchant ships and pilgrims en route to Mecca. Dissatisfied with his actions, a splinter group set out for Mecca to excavate the prophet's body. Muslim forces under Saladin's brother Malik intercepted them before they reached the holy city and wasted no time in executing them. However, once Guy ascended to the throne, Reginald resumed his reign. Disregarding Raymond's 4-year truce with Saladin, Reginald attacked a large Muslim caravan, leading to the slaughter of all the caravan's Egyptian guards in the battle. In late 1186 and early 1187, coinciding with Reginald's tumultuous actions, Templar Grand Master Gerard de Ridefort attempted to convince King Guy to reconcile with Raymond of Tripoli. Unlike Reginald, who had also been imprisoned by Muslims, Raymond had studied Arabic and cultivated an appreciation for Muslim culture. This conciliatory stance, occasionally adopted by the Templars under less extreme Grand Masters than Gerard, prompted Raymond to negotiate with Saladin for a truce to protect Tripoli and Galilee from Muslim incursions. Concurrently, he addressed the deteriorating circumstances with fellow Christians to the south. The two sides agreed to attempt to broker a deal at Tiberias, which was in Raymond's territory, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. While Gerard and a Templar contingent, together with Roger de Moulins and a force of Hospitaller Knights, were staying at the Templar castle of Lefebvre en route for Tiberias, Raymond sent word that he had allowed a Muslim scouting party into the area on condition that they kept the peace. This was a major setback for Gerard, prompting him to immediately order an attack on the Muslims. A day later, on 1st May 1187, the Frankish troops encountered Saladin's men at the springs of Cresson, north of Nazareth. Even though the Christian forces only numbered 90 Templars, with another 50 secular knights against a Muslim strength of 7,000, Gerard ordered an attack. The Marshal of the Temple, James of Mailly, and the Master of the Hospital, Roger de Moulins, both urged retreat, but Gerard accused them of cowardice. "I shall die in battle, a brave man. It is you who will a traitor's tour," James of Mailly reportedly replied. 15. The Marshal's words proved prophetic. Only Gerard and 2 other Templars managed to escape with their lives during the bloodbath that followed, nearly wiping out the Christian forces. Despite previously instigating a military catastrophe, Gerard resumed his position as the sole military advisor, advocating for a course of action diametrically opposed to prior counsel merely weeks later. As Saladin advanced relentlessly southward towards Jerusalem, he captured the city of Tiberias, thereby ensnaring Raymond of Tripoli's wife within its confines. The Franks convened a war council in Acre on 1st July. Following the resolution of his discord with King Guy, Raymond recommended remaining in place, notwithstanding the enemy's capture of his wife, as Saladin's forces were too formidable for a successful confrontation. The king appeared to concur until that evening, when Gerard proposed an offensive, persuading the king that it would be disgraceful to abandon Tiberias. Whether Gerard's counsel stemmed from a reckless disposition inherent to the Grand Master or from animosity towards Raymond, resulting in an aversion to acquiescing to the Count of Tripoli's suggestions, he ultimately swayed the king's decision. The Crusader army advanced northward at dawn until arriving at the village of Lubia. They were persistently harassed by Muslim archers and endured significant thirst. The Templars, positioned as the rearguard, requested permission to halt for the night. King Guy approved the request, regardless of whether Gerard made it directly. Reports indicate that at the forefront, Raymond declared, "Lord God, the war is over. We are dead men. The kingdom is finished." The army established a camp on the Horns of Hattin, a parched hill lacking water due to a dry well. During the night, Saladin's troops ignited the underbrush at the base of the hill, and the wind propelled the flames upward, suffocating the Franks. At dawn on 4th July, Saladin's forces launched an assault. The summer heat, dehydration, and smoke incapacitated the Crusader army, leaving them with no prospects for survival. The calamity was even more catastrophic than the previous disaster at Cresson. Muslim tradition stipulates that if a man offers sustenance, he should be spared. Following his capture, Saladin presented a glass of water to King Guy, who accepted it gratefully. Rather than extend the same courtesy to Reginald of Châtillon, the most reviled figure in the East, Saladin presented him with the choice of conversion or death, which he declined. Saladin then swiftly executed him by decapitation. He issued the same ultimatum to the Templar and Hospitaller captives: renunciation or death. Saladin despised the military orders, perceiving them as the most zealous Frankish warriors, a belief reinforced by the events at Hattin. The Templars, eager for martyrdom, nearly incited a stampede to be the first to face execution. Ultimately, all 230 Templar prisoners, along with those from the hospital, were executed, except Gerard de Riedfort, who was spared. Following the Battle of Hattin, it was inevitable for Saladin to assume control of Jerusalem. The week after Hattin, Acre capitulated, followed by Ascalon and Gaza in September. Ultimately, on 2nd October 1187, Saladin entered Jerusalem. He permitted the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to remain under Christian jurisdiction, yet he dragged the cross from the Dome of the Rock through the streets, subjecting it to trampling and beatings. Saladin compelled the Templars to relinquish their headquarters at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, although he allowed a small contingent of non-military Hospitallers to remain in the hospital temporarily, continuing their original mission of caring for sick pilgrims. They would never return there again. The Third Crusade. The announcement of Jerusalem's defeat astonished Europe. Following Gerard de Riedfort's capture, Templar Grand Commander Brother Terence took command of the order. His two letters, one composed shortly after the Battle of Hattin and the other in January 1188, chronicled the calamities that had afflicted Outremer. The magnitude and number of the calamities inflicted upon us by the wrath of God as a result of our transgressions cannot be articulated through written words or lamentations. He continues to discuss Hattin and the fall of Acre, asserting that Christian forces cannot endure much longer unless we promptly receive divine assistance and your, i.e., Western support, as the unbelievers are overrunning the entire territory like ants. The letter, ostensibly directed to Pope Urban III and Philip of Alsace, Count of Flanders, the sole prominent European leader to visit the East during that decade, also sought to disseminate broadly. It arrived at Verona for Urban, sent by Templar couriers, and had a catastrophic impact, perhaps accelerating Urban's demise. Despite Gregory VIII, his successor, being elderly and having reigned for barely 2 months, he urged the monarchs of Europe to suspend hostilities for 7 years and focus on liberating the East from the tyranny of the infidel. Upon receiving the news, King William II of Sicily donned sackcloth in place of his royal garments, withdrew, and promptly sent a fleet of galleys to assist Antioch. Analogous to the fervent zeal accompanying the First Crusade, it evolved into a rite of passage in Europe, when men engaged not primarily for absolution, but to eradicate malevolence and exhibit their valor in battle. This romanticization culminated in the monk Peter of Blois' Passio Reginaldi, which depicts the recently deceased Reginald of Chatillon as a saint and martyr, not the murderous madman he was. As preparations for a new crusade commenced in Europe, the Templars led the effort to preserve the remaining Christian territories in the East from Saladin's domination. Following the loss of Jerusalem, a vigorous Christian counter-offensive secured Tyre for the Crusaders. Numerous Templar fortifications, notably Safad, located northwest of the Sea of Galilee, and Gaston, which may have been the inaugural fortress acquired by the order in the Amanus March during the 1130s. The other principal military order, the Hospitallers, lost Belvoir, Queyrac, and Montreal. However, substantial territories persisted. Antioch, Tyre, and Tripoli all resisted Muslim assaults. Saladin liberated King Guy and Gerard de Riedfort, permitting their return to the conflict. Notwithstanding the severity of the predicament confronting the Franks, the long-standing factional conflicts persisted, as Guy discovered upon his attempt to re-enter Tyre. The city resisted Saladin mostly due to the unforeseen arrival of a fleet commanded by the German prince, Conrad of Montferrat, who subsequently assumed control of the city after Saladin ceased his attempts to capture it in early 1188. In Conrad's perspective, the calamities of the preceding year signified that Guy was no longer sovereign. Guy's subsequent action was directed against Acre, where he endeavored to besiege the city in the autumn of 1189. His endeavor to capture a city indicates that Gerard de Ridefort had been providing counsel, and a troop of Templars was present among the soldiers gathered around Acre. On 4th of October, Gerard's fortune expired, and he perished in combat beyond the walls of Acre. Following the recapture of Acre on 12th of July 1191, the Templars appointed a new Grand Master, while King Richard the Lionheart of England commenced the Reconquista against Saladin. The Third Crusade represents the pinnacle of the relationship between the Templars and a crusade leader. The Templars exhibited their essential role during the Second Crusade, mostly through their financial contributions. Nevertheless, it was in the Third Crusade that they genuinely established themselves as a powerful entity. This was primarily attributable to the new Grand Master, Robert de Sablé, a vassal and confidant of Richard the Lionheart. Despite being infamous as England's absent king, Richard spent merely 6 months in the nation throughout his decade-long reign and was an exceptional military leader, effectively assisted by the prudent Robert. Richard's tactical acumen became apparent within 2 months of his arrival in Acre. On 7th of September 1191, Saladin assaulted the Crusader army as it advanced southward from Caesarea near the grove of Arsuf. In March, the Templars constituted the rearguard, while the Hospitallers supported them at the forefront of the column. In the battle, Richard greatly altered the order's functions, confident in their discipline on the battlefield. Despite minimal losses for the Muslims, it represented Saladin's inaugural defeat since the triumph at Hattin, signifying a pivotal moment in the crusade. The coastal cities under Christian dominion recovered optimism on the recapture of Jerusalem. The Third Crusade, however, aimed not to reclaim the Holy City. Robert de Sablé and Hospitaller Grand Master Geoffroy de Donjon advised Richard that even if they succeeded in capturing Jerusalem, maintaining it after the Crusaders' withdrawal would be challenging, if not unfeasible. Richard concurred with the Grand Masters and resolved to reinforce Ascalon. Richard was eager to return to England to address his increasingly problematic brother John. Consequently, he emphasized addressing the succession matter before his departure. Guy of Lusignan, his favored candidate, was defeated by the kingdom's nobles, who supported Conrad of Montferrat as the future king of Jerusalem. Nevertheless, the assassins assassinated Conrad in the streets of Acre, facilitating the succession of Richard's nephew, Henry of Champagne. There are contentious allegations that Richard orchestrated Conrad's demise. Following negotiations with the former king, Guy of Lusignan, it was resolved to grant him Cyprus, an island that had been a point of contention for both Richard and the Templars. In early 1191, while Richard was traveling to Outremer, 2 of his ships arrived at Cyprus. The island was then governed by Isaac Ducas Comnenus, a very cunning Byzantine prince who had recently allied with Saladin. The initial ship of Richard housed crusaders, whilst the subsequent vessel transported Richard's fiancée, Berengaria of Navarre, along with her chaperone, his sister Joan, the Dowager Queen of Sicily. Richard arrived 1 week later and insisted on the release of the inmates. Isaac declined, prompting Richard, maybe perceiving Cyprus as a valuable asset for the Third Crusade, to assault Isaac's troops. The islanders swiftly subdued the Byzantines, establishing a western garrison. Richard received news following his departure for the Holy Land, indicating that the local populace was proving challenging to manage. Robert de Sablé, the newly appointed Templar Grand Master, presumably elected at Richard's request, proposed to purchase the island from Richard for 100,000 besants. Richard consented, and a Templar garrison departed for the island. Nonetheless, They had difficulties with the local populace, culminating in the siege of their fort at Nicosia on 4th April 1192, leading to the realization that maintaining control of the island would be an arduous endeavor without a more substantial force. Consequently, they resold it to Richard. Richard deemed this an ideal site for the consistently ineffective Guy, selling the island to him for 60,000 basants, thereby converting the former monarch into Guy of Cyprus. Saladin proved more complex to eliminate, and negotiations were prolonged. The Franks successfully assaulted the citadel of Daran, situated south of Ascalon, to compel him to negotiate. Richard arrived in Acre concurrently with Saladin's unexpected assault on Jaffa, capturing the town after 3 days. Richard was joined by merely 80 knights, including Templars, 400 archers, and 2,000 Italian mercenaries, with whom he orchestrated a counteroffensive and triumphed over the greater Muslim contingent. The negotiations were finalized shortly thereafter. Richard consented to the demolition of Ascalon, whilst Saladin consented to acknowledge Christian holdings along the coastline. Moreover, Saladin consented to permit Christians and Muslims to traverse each other's territories and to enable Christian pilgrims to access Jerusalem and the holy sites. On 9 October 1192, Richard departed the Holy Land, accompanied by a Templar escort, and has not returned since. Saladin passed away the subsequent year, and a fragile peace enveloped the lands beyond the sea. The Templars at the onset of the 13th century. Like much of the Latin East during the Third Crusade, the Templars endeavored to restore their dominion before the calamities of the late 1180s. The Templars built their new headquarters in Acre, the preeminent city in the Latin East, serving as their center throughout the subsequent century, notwithstanding the prohibition on Christian pilgrims visiting Jerusalem. The order had existed in the city for several decades, and the German monk Theodorich observed it in the 1170s. In the mid-13th century, the chronicler referred to as the Templar of Tyre depicted it in the following manner. Like a fortress, the coastline functioned as the city's most formidable asset. A huge and sturdy tower with a wall 28 feet thick stood at the entryway. Each side of the tower displayed a smaller tower embellished with a gilded lion passant, comparable in size to an ox. The 4 lions and the money and labor amounted to 1,500 Saracen besants and were aesthetically impressive. Another tower was situated on the opposite side, near the Pisans Street. Next to this tower, on St. Anne Street, was a grand palace owned by the master. The convent of the Nuns of St. Anne faced a tall tower embellished with bells and a grand elevated church. An ancient tower, constructed by Saladin a century ago on the coastline, contained the temple's treasure, and was situated so near the sea that the waves lapped against it. In the temple region, more exquisite and distinguished residences existed, which I shall refrain from detailing here. The Templars' efforts to re-establish themselves in the Amanus March, one of their initial fortified holdings in the east, demonstrate the extensive devastation wrought by Saladin's campaigns despite Acre, a location well known to the order, being a prudent choice for their new operational base. The Templar fortifications of Gaston, Bagras, and Darbsac succumbed to Saladin's army in September 1188, significantly undermining the order's influence. Nonetheless, Gaston became a burden on resources, leading to its abandonment by the Muslims in 1191. Prince Leo of Cilician Armenia subsequently seized and reinforced it. The Templars encountered opposition when attempting to penetrate the citadel, resulting in an extended campaign to wrest control from Leo. Leo's conflict with Antioch, the vulnerable status of the Armenian Church, and the conflicting assertions by Leo's heirs and his Antiochene adversary, Bohemond III, considerably exacerbated the circumstances. The Templars and Leo's men engaged in a sporadic campaign until 1211, during which a succession of assaults on the Templars and their assets injured the newly chosen Grand Master, Guillaume de Chartres, resulting in Pope Innocent III's excommunication of Leo. Leo perceived that his excommunication rendered him politically marginalized, prompting him to restore Gaston and other Templar assets to the order from 1213 until 1216. The resurgence of the order and Christendom, following the conclusion of the Third Crusade, is also apparent in the activities of Pope Innocent III, 1198 to 1216. In 1199, he corresponded with the leaders of Outremer, expressing his discontent that there appeared to be a lack of enthusiasm for a new crusade, which he was eager to advocate. He additionally issued a series of bulls, reinforcing the Templars' distinct position, and exhorted the clergy to protect the order's privileges and entitlements. He explicitly reminded the clergy of the Templars' right to their own burial sites and their liberty to construct churches on their property, while admonishing them against perpetrating violence on any serving brother or damaging Templar assets. Moreover, the clergy was instructed to remember that the Templars were exempt from tithes, that they should be allowed to peacefully collect tithes owed from their own lands, and that the clergy was explicitly prohibited from diverting any of these funds. The clergy was also forbidden from excommunicating Templar churches, and those who trespassed on Templar properties were to face punishment. The clergy was to ensure that brothers serving for a designated period did not depart prematurely. Bishops who compelled Templars to combat fellow Christians, as occurred in certain regions of the Iberian Peninsula and Eastern Europe, were denounced, and the clergy was mandated to safeguard the property and privileges of the Templars against usurpers, excommunicating those who defied this directive. Should the clergy fail to comprehend the matter, Innocent republished the bull that first conferred privileges upon the Templars, called Omni Datum Optimum. Innocent directly admonished the order, cautioning its members against the misuse of their privileges, fully aware that they were frequently charged with the sin of pride. He articulated his discontent with the order's policy of granting complete Christian burials to those who could afford them, disregarding potential excommunication or other factors that may preclude them from interment in consecrated ground. In prophetic terms, Innocent cautioned the order that failure to amend their conduct would render them agents of the devil. The alternative: military orders. Following the conclusion of the Third Crusade, an unforeseen occurrence in the Latin East was the formation of a new military hierarchy. In 1197, German crusaders came to the East. They were predominantly ineffective, their only military contribution being their involvement in taking Beirut that year. The majority of German crusaders returned home. However, a number of knights stayed in the East and became affiliated with a field hospital established in 1190 by merchants from Bremen and Lubeck. Tradition states that they received brethren from the Hospital of St. Mary of the Germans, established in Jerusalem in 1127 during the siege of Acre in 1191. The initial base of the new hospital in Acre was a tent constructed from a ship's mainsail on the shore. The knights consolidated to establish the Teutonic Knights of St. Mary's Hospital of Jerusalem, and on 5th of March 1198, the church recognized them as an order at the temple compound in Acre. The Teutonic Knights were the final military order to arise among the three prominent ones. Circa 1070, the Hospitallers, the inaugural of the three formidable military organizations, established themselves before the Templars. The hospital, established by a consortium of merchants from Amalfi, was initially dedicated to St. John the Almoner and functioned as an infirmary and guest house for pilgrims adjacent to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The inaugural Grand Master was Peter Gerard, elected in 1100. Godefroy de Bouillon immediately allocated properties to the order upon establishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem, prompting numerous others to do likewise, resulting in the Hospitallers' vast possessions in Europe and the East. After the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, there was a considerable rise of pilgrims, leading to the elevation of John the Baptist as the order's principal patron saint, supplanting John the Almoner. Pope Paschal II officially acknowledged the hospital as an order in 1113. Raymond de Puy, the second Grand Master of the order, supervised the hospital's transition to a more militaristic function. The Templars may have protected the hospital's institutions in the initial years, but the Hospitallers commenced militarization in the 1120s. Records from 1126 reference a Hospitaller constable, while the initial account of military engagement originated from 1136, when King Fulk conferred the stronghold of Ghibelline to the order along the Gaza-Hebron route. Similar to the Templars, the Hospitallers were granted papal privileges. Innocent II, 1130-43, prohibited bishops from interdicting Hospitaller chapels. Anastasius IV, 1153-54, assigned them their own priests, while Adrian IV, 1154-59, allocated them their own churches. Raymond's practical considerations directed the incremental development of their governance. Similar to the Teutonic Knights, the hospital-based hospital has some regulations for those of the Templars. Alongside the hospital and the Teutonic Knights, other lesser organizations were operational in the East. Following the Temple and the Hospital of St. John, the Hospital of St. Lazarus became the third military order. The order presumably started from a Greek or Armenian leper hospital in Jerusalem, serving primarily knights afflicted with leprosy. The Hospital of St. John took control in the early 1100s, with Peter Gerard, the inaugural Hospitaller Grand Master, also serving as the Grand Master of St. Lazarus. Legend states that all succeeding Grand Masters were afflicted with leprosy. They built a network of leper houses throughout the East and Europe, referred to as Lazar houses, primarily recognized for their hospitaller activities, although they also engaged in various military operations in the East with the Templars and Hospitallers. The Templar rule mandated that a brother diagnosed with leprosy be transferred to the Order of St. Lazarus. Pope Alexander III, 1159-1181, formally acknowledged the Knights of Our Lady of Montjoie as an order by promulgating a bull in 1180. The order was established by Count Rodrigo, a Spanish knight, who named it after the castle of Montjoie, located near Jerusalem. The name originates from the exclamations of delight reportedly expressed by pilgrims upon their initial sighting of the Holy City. The order, historically few in number, appeared to struggle with recruitment, and following the calamities of 1187, the remaining brothers retreated to Aragon, where they rebranded themselves as the Order of Trufac. Approximately contemporaneous with the Teutonic Knights, the Hospitallers of St. Thomas of Canterbury, commonly referred to as the Knights of St. Thomas Acon, were established. Their origins trace back to the Third Crusade. William, the Dean of St. Paul's, was profoundly affected by the suffering of the English Crusaders, prompting him to acquire a modest church and cemetery following the surrender of Acre in 1191. He limited Englishmen's access to the hospital. Nonetheless, many opted to affiliate with the Templars and the Hospitallers. Like their more renowned counterparts, they acquired land gifts throughout the East and Europe. It is believed that they were militarized during the Fifth Crusade era. The Templars' reputation in combat was unparalleled. Saladin, believing that the military orders constituted the Franks' principal weapon against Islam, commanded the execution of all captured Templars and Hospitallers following the Franks' defeat at Hattin. Saladin saw the two orders as impure races. The Templars, like the secular Franks, utilized both cavalry and infantry. The former included cavalry knights and sergeants, while the latter consisted of archers and infantry equipped with axes and spears. The knights served as the medieval counterpart to a tank, with their formidable war horses frequently reaching heights of up to 17 hands. They trained the destriers to kick, butt, and bite. Despite donning lighter armor, the sergeants positioned themselves at the back. The tactics were uncomplicated yet, when executed with precision, proved to be profoundly successful. Initially, the infantry would offer protection before the horse assault, constituting the primary offensive. An accurately timed charge would obliterate all in its trajectory. Miscalculated charges resulted in calamities such as the Springs of Cresson. The Templars vowed to stay engaged in combat, as long as the order's emblematic black and white banner, referred to as the Beau Séant, was held high. Upon losing sight of the Beau Séant, the Templars would regroup under either the Hospitaller or any surviving Christian standard. Their commitments ensured they were typically the first to arrive and the last to go from the field. During the initial period of the Latin East, the Templars rapidly established a formidable reputation as the most proficient combatants among the Franks, exhibiting near-suicidal valor on occasion. This culminated during the leadership of Gerard de Riedfort, who perished in a foolhardy assault at Acre. As the 12th century transitioned into the 13th, the Templars diminished their previous fervor and became increasingly prudent in combat. The Sanctuary and the Dominion. Innocent's aspirations for a fresh crusade in the East ultimately came to fruition in 1218, but he did not survive to witness it. Honorius III, 1216-1227, intent on activating the crusading apparatus, succeeded Innocent following his demise in July 1216. The Templars had minimal involvement in the Fourth Crusade, 1202-04, largely because the crusade failed to reach Palestine after pillaging Constantinople. But they were significantly engaged in the Fifth Crusade from the beginning. The Paris Temple initiated a crusade fund, with Brother Heimard, the Templar treasurer, supervising contributions. Honorius corresponded with the Templar Grand Master, Guillaume de Chartres, and his counterpart in the hospital, Garin de Montaigu, instructing them to convene with the Crusade's leaders, King Andrew of Hungary and Leopold, Duke of Austria, in Cyprus. Ultimately, the two men and their different forces landed independently in the east during the autumn of 1217. Following the unimpressive campaign of November 1217, they abandoned their original strategy to assault Damascus and opted to launch a battle in Egypt to seize the pivotal city of Damietta. In June 1218, the Crusaders, comprising forces of Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights, landed at Damietta with reinforcements led by John of Brienne, the King of Jerusalem, 1210-25. Peter, the brother of Garin de Montaigu, succeeded the ailing Templar Grand Master who had been unwell since the preceding autumn. For the inaugural occasion in history, the identical family governed the temple and hospital orders. Eustorge, the youngest sibling, served as the Archbishop of Nicosia. Damietta was rapidly seized. Oliver of Paderborn, the master of Cologne's Cathedral School and participant in the Fifth Crusade, expressed appreciation for the Templars' proficiency in combat within the inundated landscape of the Nile Delta, utilizing a fleet of vessels and pontoons while adeptly traversing the marshes on horseback. The arid hills and valleys of Palestine often do not see such conflict, and the Templars' successful seizure of Damietta highlighted their prowess as military tacticians and engineers. The initial success of the Crusaders prompted the Egyptian Sultan al-Kamil, Saladin's brother, to propose the exchange of Jerusalem for Damietta. Pelagius, the papal legate and self-designated leader of the crusade, declined the proposal. Like Richard's concerns regarding Jerusalem during the Third Crusade, the Montaigu brothers argued that the Crusaders could not retain Jerusalem without relinquishing territories beyond the Jordan, a stipulation absent from al-Kamil's proposal. They decided to postpone the crusade until they obtained further soldiers, since they anticipated that Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, would greatly support their efforts. Upon realizing that an imperial force would not emerge, Pelagius commanded an advance up the Nile. The Templars were hesitant, convinced that the resources for the crusade were inadequate. their apprehensions were validated. Upon arriving in Mansoura, Al-Kamal's soldiers severed the Crusaders' retreat and obstructed their advance by razing the sluice gates, thus submerging the crusade into surrender. Pelagius was compelled to acquiesce to Al-Kamil's conditions and relinquish Damietta. They also concurred on an 8-year armistice. Notwithstanding Frederick's absence, the prevailing sentiment persisted that he would honor his pledge to embark on the crusade which he had made after his coronation in Frankfurt in 1212. Frederick II was an exceptional figure of his era, the grandson of Frederick Barbarossa, who perished on the Third Crusade in 1190. His upbringing in Sicily resulted in his election as king at 3. He possessed an inherently inquisitive intellect and attained fluency in Italian, French, German, Greek, Latin, and Arabic. Frederick's choice to govern from Sicily created a political and cultural rift that extended well beyond the Straits of Messina, isolating the island from the Italian mainland. His strong fascination with Arabic culture was clear. His bodyguards were all Saracens. He was purported to be an atheist and undeniably possessed a scientific perspective on nature, which resulted in several peculiar and, at times, inhumane experiments. Children were reared in utter silence to ascertain the language they would articulate upon reaching verbal maturity, thus purportedly demonstrating the language spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. A man was confined within a wine barrel to determine if his soul could be observed departing from his body at the moment of death. 2 men, one lethargic, the other vigorous, were executed and subsequently dissected to investigate how their lifestyles had influenced their internal organs. Speculation proliferated around Frederick's personal life, and he evidently had somewhat liberal views on sexuality. He protected the Jewish population of Germany against allegations of ritualistic slaughter of Christian children and reportedly contemplated converting to Islam, which would have rendered him, as Holy Roman Emperor, neither holy, Roman, nor an emperor. Frederick and his forces ultimately arrived at Acre on 7th September 1228. Frederick's armies encountered a challenging journey, necessitating a stop at Otranto due to illness, which incited the ire of the new pope, Gregory IX, leading to the excommunication of the emperor. Frederick encountered another excommunication when he sought to initiate a crusade the subsequent spring. Frederick was not significantly troubled by this. Nonetheless, by the time he arrived in Acre that October, the clergy and nobility of Outremer were aware of his excommunications. This ultimately caused Frederick to forfeit the authority of the crusade, resulting in a schism among the Latins along papal imperial divisions. The majority of the Frankish barons, the Templars, and the Hospitallers aligned with the Pope, as the Templars were accountable solely to the pontiff, whereas the Teutonic Knights supported Frederick. Moreover, Frederick's spouse, Isabel, perished during the childbirth of their son Conrad that May, and as his claim to the throne of Jerusalem was predicated on his union with her, he was effectively no longer king. He was solely the regent for the young Conrad. Due to his questionable position as both the leader of the Sixth Crusade and king of Jerusalem, Frederick sought to establish his authority by advancing to Atlit and insisting that the Templars surrender the castle to a German garrison, likely to be managed by the Teutonic Knights. The Templars denied Frederick entry, prompting his return to Acre. His subsequent action was to advance towards Jaffa. The Templars and the Hospitallers rejected Frederick's authority and trailed the imperial army by a day's ride. Upon arriving in Arsuf, Frederick entrusted his leadership to his generals, facilitating the rejoining of the 2 principal military commands to the crusade. Anticipating an engagement with the enemy, Frederick's monumental coup exasperated the Templars, enabling him to reclaim Jerusalem diplomatically. The reclamation of the Holy City astonished the military orders and the Outremer nobles, yet, for Frederick, it was an event he may have anticipated. Before he departed from Sicily, Frederick welcomed Emir Fakhr ad-Din ibn Shaykh, the ambassador of Al-Kamil, at his court in Palermo. The emir conveyed that Al-Kamil would restore Jerusalem to Christian governance if Frederick pledged assistance to the Sultan in his endeavor to reclaim Damascus. Frederick had yet to provide Al-Kamil with a definitive response, and the topic had understandably resurfaced during the negotiations about the crusade. At this juncture, Frederick had been informed of a significant decline in the circumstances at home, where an imperial force led by Reginald of Spoleto and a papal army commanded by the former king of Jerusalem, John of Brienne, were engaged in conflict, prompting his desire to return to Palermo. While the prospect of a triumphant Christian-Muslim coalition against Al-Kamil's adversaries in Damascus may have flattered Frederick's ego, it would have been an unparalleled affront in the perception of the Pope and Western leaders. The potential consequences are challenging to envision. Frederick and Al-Kamil thus made an accord that allowed them to preserve their dignity by restoring Jerusalem to the Franks, but retaining Muslim authority over the Temple Mount. The city was to remain unprotected, linked to the coastal cities by a narrow land corridor. The two commanders established a 10-year truce, forbidding the military from augmenting their fortifications. Notwithstanding this momentous accomplishment, the reclamation of Jerusalem prompted the devout on both sides to denounce their leaders for treason, nearly inciting a civil war among the Franks. On 17th of March 1229, Frederick was proclaimed King of Jerusalem in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, notwithstanding the interdict imposed by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Gerold of Lausanne, should the emperor enter the city. The interdict prohibited any ecclesiastical rites, while Frederick resided within the city's confines. However, it proved inconsequential, as Frederick crowned himself without priests. The Templars and the Hospitallers abstained, leaving the loyal Teutonic Knights to protect the emperor and king. Their esteemed Grand Master, Hermann von Salza, presented a speech in which Frederick absolved the Pope for his opposition, a clear allusion to Frederick's dual excommunication, and vowed to make every effort to save the Church and the Empire. Frederick designated himself as God's vicar on earth, traditionally attributed to the pontiff, so he adopted a daring position. For Frederick, the adversary was not Al-Kamil, but the papacy. After the event, Frederick conducted a tour of Jerusalem. By customary Muslim diplomacy, Al-Kamil instructed the muezzins to refrain from summoning the faithful to prayer during Frederick's presence in the city. Frederick, however, seemingly desired to hear the call to prayer, citing it as his rationale for visiting Jerusalem, and upon entering the Dome of the Rock, he expelled a priest who had sought to accompany the imperial entourage, threatening to gouge out the man's eyes if he attempted it again. Frederick noted a timber lattice obscuring a window in the dome. They informed Frederick that they had positioned it there to deter the sparrows, to which Frederick retorted with a derogatory Muslim phrase for the Franks: "God has now given you pigs." Upon Frederick's return to Acre, the pigs nearly staged a mutiny against him. He discovered Gerold and the Templars mobilizing armies to reclaim Jerusalem from his dominion and assault Damascus. A fierce confrontation occurred beyond the city gates. It devolved into a verbal altercation, with Frederick directing invectives at the Patriarch and the Templars, especially the Grand Master, Peter de Montaigu. The Templar imperial ties had deteriorated to an unprecedented low, prompting both the Grand Master and the Emperor to express concerns for their personal safety. Chronicler Philip of Novara reported that Frederick intended to abduct multiple Frankish barons, including Peter de Montaigu, and subject them to a sham trial before their execution. Counter-propaganda disseminated that the Templars intended to kill Frederick during his stay in Jerusalem, and the emperor, perhaps cognizant of the conspiracy, resided in the city for merely 2 nights. Before Frederick departed from the Holy Land, he endeavored to assault the temple compound in Acre, but was unsuccessful. Upon his departure at daybreak on 1st May, 1229, he was met with derisive mobs that bombarded him with excrement. Frederick's return to the west did not signify the conclusion of his engagement with Outremer's matters. In 1231, his bailli, Richard Filangieri, arrived with an imperial force and attempted to capture Acre. Notwithstanding his failure, he established a base at Tyre, where he persisted in creating difficulties for the Templars and the anti-Frederick group. In 1232, the newly appointed Templar Grand Master, Armand de Périgord, endeavored to negotiate between Filangieri and the disgruntled Frankish barons. Nevertheless, the reconciliation effort proved unsuccessful. Throughout the remainder of the 1230s, the Templars primarily focused on regional conflicts, including launching campaigns against local warlords such as the Sultan of Hama, who defaulted on his annual tribute, or Muslim foragers encroaching upon the Templar stronghold of Atlit. The impending conclusion of the decade-long peace between Frederick and Al-Kamil reintroduced the Templars into the broader context, prompting them to embrace an anti-imperial position again. Pope Gregory, cognizant of Jerusalem's precariousness and apprehensive about the total obliteration of Latin territories, advocated for a new crusade as 1239 neared. Only one minor French lord, Theobald, Count of Champagne, accepted the cross. He landed in the east on 1st September 1239, and, akin to the members of the Second Crusade, was promptly required to comprehend the intricacies of the political landscape in Outremer. The Templars urged the Franks to establish an alliance with the governor of Damascus, assuring the restoration of territories appropriated by Muslims to Christian governance in return for their support against the Egyptians. The order promptly restored the previously diminished Templar citadel of Safad to its original fortitude. Theobald was clearly oblivious to the fact that Al-Kamil had passed away in March of the preceding year, leading to chaos in the Muslim realm as his successors and contenders vied for Al-Kamil's crown. Henry, Count of Bar, commanded a dissident contingent that opted to assault Egypt, ultimately suffering annihilation at Gaza. The responsibility did not rest with Henry for misjudging the magnitude of the Egyptian army, but rather with the Templars and Hospitallers, who accurately saw the threat from the Egyptian forces, for their refusal to assist him. A subsequent crusade commenced the next year under the command of Richard, Duke of Cornwall. Richard, nephew of the Lionheart, sibling of Henry III of England, and brother-in-law of the Emperor, evidently aspired to exert influence and promptly commenced efforts to liberate Christian captives from both Damascus and Cairo, as well as to secure formal recognition of the territories recently granted to the Franks by all involved parties. Richard's triumph was ephemeral. Immediately after he departed for England, the Templars, disenchanted by Richard's endeavors and wary of Egyptian deceit, assaulted the city of Hebron, then under Egyptian dominion, subsequently reclaiming Nablus. Following Richard's departure, the Templars engaged in overt hostilities with imperial forces led by Frederick, Richard Filangieri, and the Hospitallers. Notwithstanding the enduring animosity between the two orders, they typically arrived at a resolution before inflicting substantial damage upon one another. This time, however, the hospital successfully repelled the Templars' assault on Hebron and Nablus, choosing to negotiate with Egyptians like Richard of Cornwall instead. With the Duke of Cornwall securely en route home, Filangieri attempted to seize Acre, utilizing the hospital compound as his center of operations. The Templars, reinstating the violent anti-imperialist position they had embraced under Peter de Montaigu, engaged in the ensuing assault on the Hospitaller headquarters, besieging it for 6 months. Thomas of Aquino, the Count of Acerra, traveled to the east to accept the crown of Jerusalem on behalf of Frederick's son, Conrad, who had attained manhood. Armand de Périgord, the Templar Grand Master, vehemently opposed Conrad's ascension and instead endorsed Alice, the Dowager Queen of Cyprus, as she was the closest heir and the sole genuine contender for the regency of Jerusalem. In the summer of 1243, Genoese and Venetian forces assisted the Franks in expelling Filangieri, Count Thomas, and the remaining imperial faction from Tyre, asserting, questionably, that Conrad's claim to the throne of Jerusalem was illegitimate due to his absence in person to assert his right to the crown. Before organizing their affairs, the Franks faced a new dilemma as war erupted between Egypt and Damascus in early 1244. The Khwarezmian Turks, a clan of formidable nomads, reinforced the Egyptian soldiers on this occasion. They surged southward from their stronghold in Edessa and, on 11th July, assaulted Jerusalem. The city ultimately succumbed a month later, on 23rd August. They exhumed the remains of Godefroy de Bouillon and other monarchs of Jerusalem and ignited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Jerusalem would no longer be under Christian dominion. However, more severe consequences were imminent. The Khwarezmians advanced southward, allying with the Egyptian army at Gaza. On 17th October in La Forbie, the Frankish troops assaulted the united Muslim army. The result was catastrophic. The Damascenes abandoned the area, resulting in the massacre of the surviving Christian troops, who captured no fewer than 800 prisoners and sold them into slavery in Egypt. The Templar Grand Master, Armand de Périgord, disappeared within the confines of an Egyptian prison, leaving no evidence of his presence. The order suffered losses of approximately 260 to 300 knights, merely 33 Templars, 26 Hospitallers, and 3 Teutonic Knights returned from the battlefield. Damascus succumbed to the Egyptians the following year, and Outremer's ultimate demise appeared imminent. The decline of Acre. La Forbie was a catastrophe, nearly comparable to Hattin. The West was taken aback and considered the prospect of a new crusade. The sole ruler to reach the East was Louis IX, the venerable French king, who nearly succumbed to fever during the period when the Franks were defeated at La Forbie. His recuperation and the alarming news of the East's renewed jeopardy resolved the issue for him. Following thorough preparations, he departed from Aigues-Mortes in the Camargue on 25 August 1248, reaching Cyprus on 17 September. Present in the welcoming party was the newly appointed Templar Grand Master Guillaume de Sonnac, elected following the order's unsuccessful attempt to liberate Armand de Périgord from imprisonment in Egypt. On June 5, 1249, the Crusaders arrived in Egypt and were astonished to discover Damietta deserted. The next day, they effectively seized the city with merely one fatality. Louis resolved to advance southward towards Cairo, employing the Templars to become the vanguard. The situation appeared favorable for the Franks, a sentiment bolstered by the death of the Egyptian Sultan Al-Salih Ayyubi on 23rd November. They spent a month trying to cross a branch of the Nile without locating an appropriate crossing until a local Bedouin revealed the ford to them. On 8 February 1250, the Templars, accompanied by Richard, Count of Artois, Louis's brother, and William Longespay, the Earl of Salisbury, spearheaded the column throughout their crossing. At this juncture, circumstances began to deteriorate significantly. Upon arriving at the opposite bank of the river, Richard opted to assault the Muslims rather than await the completion of the Crusaders' crossing, compelling the Muslims to withdraw to the adjacent town of Mansourah. The Templars expressed their frustration at Richard's usurpation of their duty and communicated this sentiment to the Count. Nevertheless, Foucault du Merle, the knight grasping the bridle of Richard's horse, was deaf and did not convey the message. Richard hastened in pursuit of the Muslim armies, but the Templars, now preoccupied with preserving their reputation, followed closely, intent on reclaiming their position at the forefront. The Christian forces advanced into Mansourah, only to become trapped by the wooden beams and debris obstructing the small pathways. During the subsequent turmoil, 300 knights and 280 Templars perished. The architect of the disastrous assault, Richard of Artois, succumbed to drowning under the burden of his armor while attempting to swim to safety, and Templar Grand Master Guillaume de Sonnac sustained the loss of an eye. A subsequent assault transpired on 11th of February, resulting in Guillaume losing his remaining sight and then succumbing that same day. Although repelling the Muslim forces, it became evident that capturing Mansoura would prove challenging. Louis opted to abstain and remained in anticipation. The Muslims successfully severed the Crusaders' supply lines from Damietta, depriving them of fresh provisions, while the army remained fortified beyond the walls of Mansoura. The situation deteriorated as sickness proliferated swiftly within the Frankish army. Louis suffered from severe dysentery, necessitating many trips to the latrine. In fact, the king's visits were so numerous that, as historian Joinville noted, his attendants facilitated the situation by removing the lower portion of his trousers. Louis recognized the necessity for negotiation. Nonetheless, the king dismissed his proposal. On April 5th, the Franks commenced their retreat. The Muslims pursued them, resulting in many thousand losses among the Christians. Only 14 individuals from the military orders escaped, including 3 Templars. The seizure of most of the army, including Louis himself, constituted a definitive humiliation. The king was to surrender Damietta in return for his life and ransom the remaining prisoners for 500,000 livres. On 6th May, the Muslims reasserted control over Damietta and liberated Louis. The remaining ransom had to be paid before Louis departed Egypt, and the counting commenced on 7th May. By the conclusion of the subsequent day, it was evident that they remained 30,000 livres deficient. Louis concurred with Joinville's proposal for the king to procure the funds from the Templars. Joinville approached the Templars to request the funds. However, the order's commander, Stephen of Autrecourt, declined to disburse the amount, as he could only authorize the release of funds to the original depositors. The conflict among the Templars intensified, culminating in a furious confrontation between Joinville and the commander. Ultimately, Templar Marshal Reginald de Vichier proposed that, although their solemn oaths to safeguard their customers' finances, nothing could deter Joinville from seizing the funds by coercion. Consequently, Joinville embarked aboard the Templar galley with the king's authorization, safeguarding the funds in the hold. Nevertheless, the Templar treasurer declined to unlock the strongbox, possibly due to Joinville's somewhat disheveled look following the hardships of the withdrawal from Mansoura and the fact that he was brandishing an axe. At this juncture, Reginald de Vichier, evidently apprehensive that Joinville was poised to perpetrate an act of aggression, interfered and instructed the treasurer to unlock the strongbox and relinquish the funds. On May 13th, Louis returned to Acre and endorsed Reginald de Vichier's election as Grand Master of the Temple. This was partly to recompense Reginald for his contribution to the king's liberation and his engagement with the crusade from its outset. As early as 1246, Reginald represented Louis in organizing transportation for the Crusaders to the east. Louis resided in Outremer for an additional 4 years and originally maintained a close relationship with the Templars. Louis gave birth to his son in the fortress of Atlit, with Reginald acting as his godfather. However, relations rapidly deteriorated when Reginald attempted to establish a new alliance with Damascus without informing Louis. The king was enraged and compelled the Grand Master to undertake public penance for his disobedience. Louis departed from the east in April 1254. Notwithstanding the setback in Egypt, the crusade accomplished multiple objectives. It enhanced defenses in crucial cities such as Caesarea, Jaffa, Sidon, and Acre, and Louis committed to supporting their upkeep by supplying a continuous garrison of French men. The inland castles, including Safad, were entirely controlled by military orders, as their maintenance had become prohibitively costly for the secular nobility. Moreover, Louis proved that Outremer could continue to operate efficiently under the leadership of a formidable figure capable of uniting the Frankish nobles. During his 6 years in the East, he infused a substantial sum into the economy, 1.3 million livres tournois, approximately 11 or 12 times the annual revenue of his kingdom. Upon Louis' departure, he withdrew his leadership and financial backing. Regrettably for the Franks, this occurred nearly simultaneously with the emergence of two new powers that would threaten Outremer: the Mongols and the Mamluks. Among the two, the Mongols emerged as the most pressing menace. The Frankish apprehension of them united all three principal military orders. The Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights resolved to suspend their customary conflicts, toto defend Outremer, a remarkable feat given the civil war that erupted in the East shortly after Louis's departure. They urgently sent letters to the West. A Templar messenger successfully reached London in under 13 weeks, delivering a grim report on the circumstances in the East, akin to the correspondence of Brother Terence following the calamities of 1187. King Henry III and the Templars encountered unparalleled sorrow and grief upon perusing these letters. The report disclosed that the Tartars, Mongols, moving with formidable strength, had already seized and ravaged the Holy Land. Approaching Acre. The world will soon confront catastrophic devastation if aid does not arrive swiftly. On 3rd of September 1260, Outremer suffered a catastrophic defeat. However, the Mongols bore the most consequences. The Mamluk soldiers, commanded by Sultan Saifuddin Qutuz, defeated a Mongol army at Ain Julati, located south of Nazareth. The Mamluks, an elite class of slave fighters integral to the Egyptian military for a century, just usurped control in Egypt, terminating the reign of Saladin's successors. The month after the triumph at Ain Julai resulted in Qutuz's prompt removal and assassination. Baybars, having served in the Egyptian army at La Fourbi and opposed Louis at Mansoura, succeeded him as sultan, inflicting greater harm on the Franks than any Muslim leader since Saladin. Baybars promptly commenced the obliteration of Frankish holdings in Outremer. The 1260s represent a series of Christian defeats, including the collapse of significant Templar fortifications such as Safad and the Hospitaller stronghold of Crac des Chevaliers. Following the resolution of the pressing issue of Sicily and the heirs of Frederick, Pope Clement IV resolved to initiate a new crusade. King Louis dispatched further funds to the East through the Templars. Upon receiving the monies, the East promptly dispatched further correspondence, imploring additional financial help for the men. The appeals for assistance were incessant. On 18th of May 1268, Antioch succumbed, prompting Thomas Berard, the Templar Grand Master, to conclude that the order's holdings in the Amanus March were indefensible, leading to their reluctant abandonment. Only Prince Edward of England's final crusade in April 1272 convinced the Mamluk Sultan to consent to a decade-long truce, temporarily halting the seemingly inexorable advance of Baybars. It was serendipitously scheduled. The Franks could not endure for much longer, and Edward was compelled to return to England upon his father's death, Henry III, to ascend the throne as Edward I. In May 1274, the Council of Lyons deliberated a new crusade. Although the Templars held a significant position in the discussions, with the Grand Master seated alongside the Pope, they failed to achieve a consensus. Factional conflicts, primarily centered on claims to the throne, once more fragmented Outremer. The Templars supported Charles of Anjou, who ultimately seized control of Sicily from Frederick's son, Conradin, whom he killed in Naples in 1268. Frustrated by the Templars' exclusive allegiance to their regulations, King Hugh III of Jerusalem departed for Cyprus, vacating the overall leadership position. He attempted to reclaim control of Outremer twice, in 1279 and 1283, but failed each time. The Templars became mired in several factions. A civil war occurred in the county of Tripoli from 1277 to 1282, a fight that diminished their prestige and perhaps exacerbated the prevalent suspicion of the Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu. In 1282, Guillaume successfully negotiated a fresh 10-year peace with the Mamluks. In 1285, it was breached. Baybars died in July 1277, and his successor, Calavun, was determined to complete the endeavors initiated by his predecessor. In April 1285, the seaside city of Latakia was captured, and it was succeeded by the hospitaller citadel of Al-Markab in the subsequent month. A double agent within the Mamluk leadership informed the Templars about Calavun's strategies and alerted them to the impending threat to Tripoli. The Tripolitans likely dismissed the warning from Guillaume's envoy due to the Grand Master's evident political deceit. In desperation, they sent a second messenger, although it proved futile. When the Tripolitans recognized their peril, it was too late for reinforcements to arrive, resulting in the city's capture by Calavun in April 1289. Correspondence to the west persisted at an accelerated rate. In August 1290, a new contingent of crusaders arrived in Acre. Unfortunately, these crusaders, mainly pirates, offenders, and intoxicated individuals, would have seamlessly integrated into the First Crusade, swiftly inciting a disturbance that led to the fatalities of many Muslim merchants. This served as the justification Calavun required for an assault on the city. Once again, the Templars received advance notice from their strategically positioned informant near Calavun. Nevertheless, like the fable of the kid who cried wolf, Guillaume's alert was disregarded. On April 5, 1291, the Mamluks commenced their siege of Acre. Calavun had passed away in November. Nonetheless, this did not impede the preparations for an assault. His son, Al-Ashraf Khalil, took over. 10 days later, Guillaume de Beaujeu orchestrated a bold nocturnal assault on Al-Ashraf's soldiers. However, the Mamluk tent ropes compelled the Templars to withdraw. On May 15th, a coalition of Templars and Hospitallers effectively thwarted a Mamluk attack on St. Anthony's Gate. Nevertheless, they could not prevent the Muslim forces from breaching their defenses indefinitely, and on May 18th, they infiltrated Acre at the infamous Accursed Tower. Guillaume de Beaujeu seemed to be indulging in a well-deserved respite at that moment. Upon discovering that the Mamluks had breached the city's walls, he hastily joined the fray without pausing to equip his armor. The street combat inflicted injuries on him, resulting in his demise that evening. Within hours, the entire city, excluding the temple area, was under Muslim control, and the harbor was congested with ships transporting people to Cyprus. On 25 May, Templar Marshal Peter de Sèvres consented to capitulate, providing that the Mamluks assured the safety of all individuals seeking refuge within the temple courtyard. The Templars repelled the Mamluks, who had violated their agreement. There can be no capitulation now. That evening, Templar commander Theobald Gaudin departed from Acre with the Templar riches on his galley. 3 days later, the temple succumbed. Those within participated in a perilous struggle. The remaining Templars in Sidon appointed Theobald as Grand Master. A substantial Mamluk contingent emerged, prompting the Templars to withdraw to their fortress. Theobald resolved to voyage to Cyprus and return with reinforcements. Cyprus failed to dispatch reinforcements, merely conveying a note urging the Templars to vacate the Holy Land. Hence, they relinquished Sidon on 14th of July. Haifa capitulated on the 30th, leaving only Tortosa and Atlit under Templar control. The Templars successfully isolated them, compelling their evacuation and the abandonment of Tortosa on 3rd August and the formidable Atlit on 14th August. Upon reaching Atlit, the Mamluks demolished it to prevent the Templars from returning and reclaiming the sole fortress that had triumphed over Baybars. However, their apprehensions were unjustified. With the fall of Acre, Outremer also succumbed. The Templars would never again return to the Holy Land. Decline and examination, 1291 with 1314. Theobald Gaudin did not endure long after the fall of Acre. Jacques de Molay, arguably the most renowned Grand Master of the Order alongside Hugues de Payen, replaced him following his death on 16th April in 1292 or 1293. Jacques was likely approximately 50 years old when he was elected, most presumably during a chapter meeting at the Order's new headquarters in Limassol, Cyprus. In 1265, Humbert of Perraud, the Master in England, and Amaury Laroche, the Master in France, inducted him into the Templars at Beaune in Burgundy. Based on available information, he seems to embody the archetype of an old-school Templar, serving as a master primarily focused on the restoration of Outremer. This stance sharply contrasts with the political maneuverings of Guillaume de Beaujeu. However, it is important to acknowledge that the Holy Land remained under Christian control during Guillaume's leadership, whereas Molay confronted a significantly different context upon assuming the role. Molay endorsed Pope Nicholas IV's appeals for a new crusade, and a significant portion of his leadership until 1307 was focused on re-establishing a Frankish presence on the mainland, with the sole Christian-held area being the Templar fortress on the little island of Rouad, located off the coast of Tortosa. Following the seeming temporary loss of Outremer, discussions arose over the necessity for the principal military orders to amalgamate, as the incessant disputes between the temple and hospital were attributed to the loss of the Holy Land. Both organizations were disinclined towards the concept, and the years after 1291 witnessed the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights endeavoring to establish themselves in new regions, while the latter two orders sought to redefine their aims. The Hospitallers assumed a marine role, designating the Mediterranean as their primary area of operations. Initially located in Cyprus in 1306, they captured the island of Rhodes, establishing it as their base, which granted them a considerable degree of autonomy from the influence of Rome and European monarchs. The Teutons subsequently relocated to Venice, and then to Marienburg in Prussia, where they committed wholly to the fight against the pagans in the Baltic. They were not only distant from Rome, but also strengthened their position by establishing Prussia as the Ordensland, a territory explicitly founded and governed by a military order, a long-held ambition of the Templars. For several decades preceding the fall of Acre, the Templars favored the Languedoc as their domain, but they also temporarily moved to Cyprus. Despite selling the island back to Richard the Lionheart in 1192, they held assets there, establishing Limassol as their new capital. Nevertheless, the order became embroiled in local politics as the specters of the 1190s persisted in their influence. King Henry of Cyprus was displeased with the arrival of the era's most formidable military force at his doorstep, and in 1298 he lodged an official grievance over the Templars' conduct, alleging the customary transgressions of hubris and avarice. The Templars orchestrated a coup in 1306, compelling Henry to resign in favor of his brother Amaury. Jacques de Molay's initial significant endeavor as Grand Master was to journey to the west in 1294-95 to bolster support for the order. He arrived in Rome in December 1294, coinciding with the investiture of Pope Boniface CE. Boniface conferred upon the Templars the same privileges in Cyprus as they possessed in Outremer, which satisfied Jacques de Molay, though not King Henry. Additional assistance was provided in the Italian peninsula. Charles E. of Naples granted the order an exemption from taxes on food exports. In light of the numerous offers of assistance, Jacques promptly corresponded with each European monarch. He journeyed to Paris and London, where Edward I assured the provision of a crusading army after addressing the French and the Scots. He also granted an exemption from export tax on cash from the London Temple in Cyprus. Similar to previous crusades, the Templars established a military presence in the east in 1300. It was often assumed that the Mongols would re-enter the Holy Land, seize Jerusalem from Mamluk dominion, and restore it to the Franks. In the summer of 1300, the Templars initiated a series of attacks against the coastal cities of Egypt and Syria, laying the groundwork for a potential assault, and in November they commenced preparations for an invasion of the mainland. 600 knights were dispatched to Ruad to await updates regarding the anticipated arrival of a coalition of Mongols led by Ilkhan Ghazan and Armenians under King Hetum. Upon the Mongols' and Armenians' arrival in Tortosa in February 1301, they discovered the absence of any welcoming party. Lacking reinforcements, the Templars had abandoned the location and returned to Cyprus. The deployment of Ruad in this unsuccessful operation had notified the Mamluks in Egypt of the island's strategic significance, exacerbating the situation. In 1302, a Mamluk assault annihilated the troops present. This culminated in the forfeiture of the final Templar stronghold at Outremer. The prospect of amalgamating the temple with the hospital resurfaced upon the elevation of Clement V to the papacy in November 1305. He asked Jacques de Molay and Fulk de Villeret, the Grand Master of the hospital, to articulate their perspectives. Jacques de Molay deemed the concept unworkable. In his memoir to the Pope, dictated in 1306, he studied the grounds for and against a merger and decided that, despite their analogous objectives, the two orders would operate more effectively if they maintained their independence. Clement solicited de Molay's perspective for a new crusade, to which the Grand Master replied with a subsequent memoir. Historically, the Crusades were categorized as either a passage general, allowing universal participation, exemplified by the First Crusade, or a passage particular, including a restricted contingent of professional troops targeting specific objectives, as was typical in most subsequent crusades. De Molay opposed the dominant sentiment of the era and proposed that, in light of the fall of Ruad, the passage general was the sole feasible alternative. Clement, unconvinced, summoned both de Molay and de Villeret to France for additional discourse. The Pope's gastroenteritis episode necessitated postponing the meeting originally set for All Saints' Day, 1306. De Molay landed in the West in late 1306 or early 1307. The hospital's initiatives on roads postponed Fulk de Villeret's arrival until late summer. De Molay and Clement deliberated on a third issue while awaiting the arrival of the Hospitaller Grand Master in France. 2 years prior, several expelled knights had leveled serious accusations of misconduct against the Templars, leading de Molay to solicit a papal inquiry to rehabilitate the order's reputation. On 24th August, the Pope communicated with the French King Philip IV, expressing his disbelief regarding the allegations against the order. However, having encountered numerous peculiar accounts about the Templars, he resolved, not without considerable sorrow, anxiety, and distress, to initiate an investigation. He instructed Philip to refrain from any additional actions. However, the French king disregarded the counsel. At dawn, on Friday, 13th October, his operatives apprehended all the Templars present in France, including Jacques de Molay, who was captured in the temple in Paris on allegations of heresy, sodomy, blasphemy, and renunciation of Christ. Philip's acts elicited incredulity among the monarchs of Europe. James II of Aragon, among others, contended that Philip, who was infamously bankrupt, fabricated the accusations against the order to acquire the considerable riches of the Templars. This was not the first instance in which the French king had astonished his peers with his audacity and hubris. In 1303, he attempted to abduct Pope Boniface VIII and transport him to France to confront charges akin to those brought against the Templars. The endeavor failed, but the shock resulted in Boniface's death. Philip conducted a protracted war against the Italian bankers, the Lombards, ultimately apprehending them and confiscating all their assets in 1311. In July 1306, Philip apprehended the Jews, confiscated their assets, and expelled them from the country. Furthermore, Philip had devalued the coinage multiple times, a decision that was exceedingly unpopular. In 1306, he sought refuge in the Paris temple to escape an infuriated crowd. It is conceivable that during his time at the Templar compound, he devised a scheme to appropriate their fortune to mitigate his ongoing financial difficulties. Clement corresponded with Philip in August 1307. Nevertheless, it appeared that the French king had already resolved to issue orders for the arrest of the Templars on 14th of September. Philip regarded his quest to eliminate the Templars as a personal crusade reminiscent of his ancestor Louis IX, who was canonized by Boniface VIII in 1297 at the behest of the French king. Philip was both an arrogant bully and a fervently religious individual, as was the other principal figure involved in the arrests, the Keeper of the Seals, Guillaume de Nogaret. De Nogaret's fervor surpassed Philip's, leading some to see him as the principal instigator of the battle against the Templars. Speculation indicates that he had a Cathar ancestor who died during the Albigensian Crusade. Further details to follow. In the early 14th century, the apprehension of heresy and sorcery permeated society, affecting everyone from peasants in their dwellings to anxious popes and monarchs. Philip and de Nogaret charged Boniface with heresy, asserting that the Pope colluded with the devil, while the Templars encountered analogous allegations. Despite being perceived as a feeble pope under the influence of the French monarchy, Clement resisted the campaign against the Templars, inciting Philip's ire. Clement was indeed incensed. Philip's apprehension of the Templars within his territories was unlawful, as the order was solely accountable to Rome. Furthermore, de Nogaret was at risk of excommunication during that period. Clement composed an irate letter to Philip on 27th of October, reproaching him for transgressing every rule by detaining the Templars, a flagrant act of disdain towards us and the Roman Church. Clement perceived the Church as imperiled, which he regarded as a genuine conflict about to ensue. On 25th October, 2 days before Clement's letter to Philip, Jacques de Molay confessed before an assembly at the University of Paris that he had renounced Christ and desecrated the cross. Subsequent admissions were made by all the other senior Templars in confinement. Scandal and indignation erupted in Paris, with rioters demonstrating their fury towards the order. Philip leveraged this situation, intensifying pressure on Clement to mandate the global arrest of Templars. On 22nd November, Clement consented and promulgated the bull Pastoralis Praemunentii, which mandated the apprehension of all European Templars. Philip was gravely misguided if he anticipated other rulers would emulate his example. King James II of Aragon was incredulous. Edward II of England acted minimally for an extended duration. In Germany, there was pervasive skepticism, and in Cyprus, the allegations were categorically disbelieved. In Italy, the circumstances differed by region. Naples and the Papal States responded immediately, whilst Lombardy showed considerable support for the directive. All nations ultimately conducted arrests, although the efficacy of obtaining confessions depended on whether the particular country or state sanctioned torture. Consequently, in England and throughout the Iberian Peninsula, where torture was either legally forbidden or employed sparingly at the request of Clement, minimal confessions were obtained from imprisoned Templars. In Naples and the Papal States, the Inquisition was permitted to employ what was euphemistically termed ecclesiastical procedure. Consequently, the frequency of confessions was elevated, albeit not to the extent observed in France, where every arrested Templar, including de Molay, endured torture. Templar confessions varied in substance. likely influenced by the severity of torture endured. During their initiation ceremony, most Templars admitted to spitting, trampling, and urinating on the cross, while also renouncing Christ as a false prophet. One Templar claimed to have been advised, "Put not thy faith in this," the crucifix, "as it is too young." The ceremony also featured lewd kisses, typically on the navel and lower back, though some confessed to kissing the buttocks or penis. The Mass reportedly excluded the words of consecration. Additionally, many confessed to venerating an idol named Baphomet, which, depending on the confessor, was depicted as either a severed head or a single head with 3 faces. In other instances, it represented a bearded man, a woman, or a cat. There were also admissions of engaging in sexual acts with demonic women and even infanticide. Clement insisted that a papal committee listen to the confessions, and on 24th of December, Jacques de Molay and other high-ranking Templars presented themselves before it. Now appearing secure from Philip's influence, de Molay retracted his confession, asserting that he had initially made it only after experiencing torture. The other Templars followed suit. This undoubtedly thwarted Philip and de Nogaret's strategy for a rapid and conclusive effort to dismantle the order, appropriate its assets, and position the French crown as the preeminent authority in Europe and the defender of the one true faith. Bullies failed to intimidate Clement, and in February 1308, he halted proceedings. Philip promptly consulted physicians at the University of Paris to strengthen the prosecution's legal position. In their response on 25th of March, the physicians conveyed their skepticism regarding Philip's case. The king became increasingly agitated. In May, he convened a meeting of the Estates General to sway public opinion. This effort also yielded mixed results, as public support for the Templars increased alongside growing distrust of the king. In June, tensions escalated when Clement arrived in Poitiers to reclaim authority from the French crown and restore it to the church. Philip dispatched 72 Templars to confess before him. On 27th of June, Clement heard their confessions and consented to establish 2 inquiries, one to investigate the order as a whole, and the other to scrutinize individual Templars. With French troops encircling the town, Clement's effective house arrest significantly influenced his compliance with Philip's demands. The remainder of the summer was characterized by a flurry of bureaucratic activity, issuing summonses to form the 2 commissions. Notably, a single day in August witnessed the dispatch of nearly 500 such letters. After enduring additional torture, de Molay and other Templar leaders at Chinon retracted their previous statements, signifying Philip's eventual triumph. However, the task required significant effort. The process of gathering all the evidence proved to be more time-consuming than Philip had anticipated, leading to the formal opening of the papal hearings on 22nd November 1309, more than a year later. Jacques de Molay appeared before the committee on 26 November and expressed his wish to defend his order, but felt unable to do so as he was a poor, unlettered knight. Unlike the other military orders, which seemed to be much more in tune with the increasing legalism of the period, the Templars under de Molay seemed blithely unconcerned with the changing political climate in the West, and as a result, had no legal counsel at their disposal, a fact that now appeared to be their undoing. De Molay gave further evidence 2 days later and repeated that he could not defend the order. He further erred when he declared that he would only speak to Clement face to face, mistakenly believing he could clear himself and his order through a personal appeal. Philip's agents informed imprisoned Templars that their Grand Master had failed to protect them, intending to undermine their morale, and initially this strategy appeared effective. However, when the hearings resumed in February 1310, 2 Templars, Peter of Bologna and Reginald of Provins, possessing legal training before 1307, stepped forward to defend their order against all accusations. Philip was compelled to permit the Templars to present their defense. On 1st April, they articulated a compelling argument for the order's innocence, with Peter of Bologna notably delivering a powerful assertion that the Templars were blameless and had fallen victim to a malicious conspiracy. He condemned the use of torture, which had merely yielded the confessions desired by the inquisitors. One Templar claimed he would have confessed to murdering God to alleviate his suffering, despite Philip's assurance against its application. In a manner reminiscent of his coercion of Clement at Poitiers in June 1308, Philip resorted to overt intimidation to achieve his objectives. On 11 May, as support among the imprisoned brothers for their defense intensified, it was declared that 54 Templars who had retracted their confessions would be executed by burning as relapsed heretics. The subsequent day, 54 members of the order faced the stake, asserting their innocence as the flames engulfed them. Reginald of Provence vanished from prison only to reappear mysteriously, while Peter of Bologna disappeared and was never seen again, likely having been murdered by Philip's agents. The order lacked any defenders, leading to the swift collapse of the Templar defense. The Council of Vienne, initially scheduled for October 1310 to address the suppression of the Templars, was postponed due to the protracted papal hearings. Ultimately, on 5 June 1311, the council convened, commencing its sessions on 16 October 1311. Attendance was minimal, attributed to inclement weather and inadequate accommodations in the town. After addressing two urgent issues, a new crusade and ecclesiastical reform, the council focused on the dissolution of the Templars. Speculation abounded regarding a potential last-minute defense by the order, and unexpectedly 7 fully armed knights who had evaded capture 4 years prior appeared to advocate for the order. Pope Clement requested the council permit the knights to speak, and the majority acquiesced. Philip was understandably furious, and even Clement appeared taken aback by the decision to allow the Templars to voice their opinions. The Pope desired a definitive resolution to the entire issue. The disease was by now rampant in Vienne, with several church fathers having succumbed, and the thought of Philip putting in another appearance did nothing for the Pope's confidence. On 20th March, Philip and a small armed force did indeed arrive in Vienne, and the Pope knew that he had to act quickly. 2 days later, in a secret consistory, Clement issued the bull Vox in Excels, which, despite not finding the Templars guilty as charged, permanently dissolved the order due to the shame and infamy it had brought upon it. There was still dissent among the Church Fathers, with the Bishop of Valencia declaring that the suppression of the Templars was against reason and justice. 31. On 2nd May, a second bull ad providam was issued, which, against Philip's wishes, transferred the temple's possessions to the hospital. 4 days after that, a third bull, considerantes dudum, gave the provincial councils the power to decide the fate of individual Templars. Papal judgment alone reserved the fate of the order's leaders. Jacques de Molay and 3 other senior Templars remained in prison, awaiting the Pope's decision. In late December 1313, Clement finally set up a council to decide the fate of the 4 men. The cardinals, appointed by the Pope, called for a meeting of theology and canon law doctors to decide the matter, and the council finally met in Paris on Monday, 18th of March, 1314. Facing the doctors alongside Jacques de Molay were Geoffroy de Charnay, preceptor of Normandy, Hugues de Payen, the order's visitor, ambassador in France, and Geoffroy de Gonville, preceptor of Aquitaine and Poitou. All were older men. De Molay was at least 70. De Payen and de Charnay were in their 60s, while de Gonville was probably still in his 50s. Notre Dame led them to a platform where they read their sentences. All 4 men found guilty of heresy received a sentence of harsh and perpetual imprisonment. 32. Hugues de Payen and Geoffroy de Gonville accepted the sentence, and were led away to die miserably in jail. Jacques de Molay, having endured 4 years of solitary confinement, abruptly proclaimed his and his order's innocence of all charges and publicly retracted his confession. This revelation astonished the cardinals and doctors, leaving them uncertain. Jacques de Molay's defining moment arrived after 7 years of imprisonment, during which he persistently failed to defend his order. He resolutely denied any admission of guilt. Geoffroy de Charnay supported his master, asserting the order's innocence. King Philip hastened to learn of this unforeseen development and returned the 2 men to their cells. The king now faced a legal and ecclesiastical crisis. He summoned the lay members of his council, leading to a resolution of the situation. While the 2 Templars maintained their innocence, they were nonetheless guilty of relapsed heresy, which carried a singular consequence: execution by fire. Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charnay were led to the Ile des Javiots in the Seine around Vespers. They were stripped to their shirts before a crowd witnessed the 2 Templars' final moments. Observers noted that both appeared composed, almost relieved that their suffering was concluding. As de Molay was secured to the stake, he requested to face the Cathedral of Notre Dame and to have his hands untied to die in prayer. His request was granted. Amidst the escalating noise, de Molay reportedly reaffirmed his and the order's innocence, invoking Clement and Philip to appear before God within the year. Philip may have been watching from an upper window in the nearby palace. Geoffroy de Charnay similarly protested from the stake. "I will adhere to the path of my mentor. As a martyr, you have slain him. You committed this act and, God willing, were oblivious to it on this specific day. I will perish in the order, just as he did." Following midnight, with the 2 men reduced to dust and ash and the crowd left, 3 friars from the adjacent Augustinian house, accompanied by some unidentified individuals, went to the execution site to collect the bones of the 2 Templars for preservation as relics. Templar mysteries. The fact that the Templars fell from grace so spectacularly suggests that some wilder accusations against them had some basis in reality. While most commentators at the time and subsequently have attributed Philip's avarice as the driving force behind his attack on the order, some, like the eminent medieval historian Sir Stephen Runciman, maintain that there is some truth to the charges. It would be unwise to dismiss these rumors of heresy as the unfounded invention of enemies. They likely possessed sufficient substance to outline the most convincing attack path against the order. If the end of the order remains controversial, then its beginnings are equally shrouded in mystery and silence. The mystery of Templar origins. The traditional picture that Hugues de Payen and Godefroy de Saint-Omer presented themselves to King Baldwin II around the year 1119 with the suggestion that they form an order of 9 knights who would protect pilgrims visiting the Holy Land derives from Guillaume of Tyre, died c. 1186, the first chronicler to mention the order. Yet Guillaume, like most medieval historians, is unreliable. He notes that the Council of Troyes took place in the 9th year of the order's existence, potentially launching the Templars at the Council of Nablus in 1120, but he also notes that they did not accept new members for the first 9 years. As Fulk, Count of Anjou, is known to have joined the order on his pilgrimage of 1120, this would push the foundation date of the temple back to 1111. As Runciman notes, Guillaume's dating is confused and at times demonstrably wrong. 35. If Guillaume needs clarification, then he is one of many. The other 2 chronicles dating from the late 12th century, those of Michael the Syrian and Walter Map, disagree with Guillaume and each other. According to Michael the Syrian, d. 1199, it was the king of Jerusalem who suggested to Hugues de Payen that he form a military order, with the initial membership set at 30. Walter Map, d.c. 1210, believed that a knight from Burgundy named Paganus, who frequently defended pilgrims at a horse pool near Jerusalem, founded the order. Despite his best efforts, Indies grew, forcing him to seek extra recruits. Consequently, he provided the knights with lodgings near the Temple of the Lord, which could very well be the Al-Aqsa Mosque at the southern end of the temple platform. A further hint is that the Templars existed before their official founding date of around 1119. 5 years previously, the Bishop of Chartres had written to Hugh, Count of Champagne, himself either a founding Templar or, at the very least, one of the order's first supporters, upon his return from his second visit to the East. We have heard that, before leaving Jerusalem, you made a vow to join the militia of Christ, that you will enroll in this evangelical soldiery. Given the close ties between Hugh, Bernard, and the fledgling order, and the fact that Saint Bernard would also use the phrase militia of Christ about the Templars, this comment from the Bishop of Chartres is perhaps the most compelling evidence we have that the Templars, in one form or another, existed at least as early as 1114. The fact that the years before the Council of Troyes are the order's least documented period adds to the mystery surrounding the temple's early years. Indeed, their documentation could be more extensive. The Templars had no official foundation records, which is unusual for a religious order. Until the Second Crusade, there were no Western chroniclers in Outremer. Interestingly, Hugues de Payen, the king's chronicler, who lived in Jerusalem at the time of the order's alleged foundation, did not mention the Templars. Only 4 documents exist before Troyes that mention the Templars. 2 note the order in connection with the hospital. A later chronicle, that of Ernoul and Bernard, the treasurer, also suggests some close link between the 2 orders. Interestingly, in this version, the Templars asked the king to give them his palace in front of the Lord's temple. 38. Indeed, recent research confirms that the Augustinian canons of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre initially provided accommodation for the Templars, and that the buildings they occupied were part of the hospital located just to the south. If the Templars had been at the hospital since 1111, what were they doing? Out of the 4 pre-1129 documents, none of them describes the Templars as protecting pilgrims. Could they have provided security at the hospital, or was something else going on? People frequently assert that the First Crusade inaugurated a grand design that included the Templars. Although we cannot prove this, we also cannot disprove it. Sufficient gaps exist. The historical record allows the Templars a more nebulous role than the traditionally ascribed one. Indeed, in the early years of Outremer, mysterious figures whose names remain unknown to us operated in the background. An anonymous group of advisors accompanied Godefroy de Bouillon to the east. The name is known only to one of them, Peter the Hermit. A mysterious group of monks who traveled en masse from Calabria in Italy may have linked Peter to their arrival on Godefroy's estates at Orval in the Ardennes sometime around 1090. Then, it is believed that Peter became Godefroy's personal tutor and was among those who called for a crusade in 1095. Peter was the leader of the first group of crusaders to leave Europe. A group of mysterious nobles, including a certain Bishop of Calabria, offered Godefroy the crown of Jerusalem when Jerusalem fell, and Godefroy subsequently appears to have built an abbey just outside the city walls on Mount Sion. The Order of Sion, one of the most obscure religious fraternities of the time, may have founded the Templars. Hugh, Count of Champagne, is an even more intriguing figure than Godefroy. His departure for the East in 1104 seems to have been at the behest of a group of anonymous nobles, and it is possible that Hugh visited Outremer on some fact-finding mission. By his second visit in 1114, the militia of Christ, possibly the Templars, had taken shape. Although Hugh did not join immediately, he returned to France and donated land to Saint Bernard, who used it to found Clairvaux's new monastic house. Saint Bernard later became the Templars' chief apologist in the West, and the Cistercians and the Templars expanded exponentially, with Hugh supporting both orders. Was Hugh working in accord with some larger plan? At the very least, he seems to have been a man who was acutely aware of the zeitgeist of his time. And when he did officially join the Templars in 1125, he had to swear an oath of fealty, as would any new recruit to the order, to his own vassal, Hugues de Payen. This is remarkable, and could suggest that even at this early stage, a powerful mystique surrounded the order, which its members seem to have actively encouraged. The Temple and the Temple Mount. One tradition holds that while officially supposed to be protecting pilgrims, the Templars, or a group of them at least, were involved in archaeological excavations that took place beneath the temple platform, in what is known as Solomon's Stables. Rumors had long circulated that Hugues de Payen, the Count of Champagne, and others, aware of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, hid the treasure beneath the Temple Mount. Alternatively, the order could have stumbled across something in the stables while carrying out alterations, as they were known to have done a significant deal of building work around the Al-Aqsa Mosque, starting in the 1120s. If the order did indeed find something beneath the Temple Mount, what could it have been? Speculation has been rife. Indeed, where the Templars are concerned, speculation is always rife, that they found one or more priceless relics, such as the embalmed head of John the Baptist, documents about the true origins of Christianity, and the Ark of the Covenant. Perhaps they unearthed the treasure of the Second Temple, known to contain gold and other precious metals and stones. Such a significant discovery is not implausible. After all, the scrolls found at Nag Hammadi and Qumran in the mid-1940s had remained untouched and well preserved for nearly 2,000 years. The Temple and the Grail. One priceless relic the Templars are most associated with is the Holy Grail. 42 popular chivalric epics of the period, like Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival, portray the Templars as its guardians. Another Grail romance, the 13th century French romance, Perlesvaux, may have been written by a Templar, such is its attention to detail regarding military matters. However, the most intriguing link between the Templars and the Grail is that their official launch occurred in Troy, where Chrétien de Troyes wrote the first Grail romance, the Conte del Graal, circa 1180. The strong connection between the Templars and the Grail does not bring us closer to understanding what the Grail actually is. Traditionally seen as the cup used at the Last Supper, which caught Christ's blood at Calvary, the Grail is also a Christianization of the Celtic myths of the Cauldron of Plenty, which gave the land fertility and endless renewal. But in the hands of Chrétien, the Celtic story is merely the foundation to which he grafts new material. His writing in Troy suggests that Templars, or those associated with the order, may have brought whatever new information he was privy to back to the city. A slightly later version of the Grail story, Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival, composed c. 1220, makes this more explicit by setting some of his poem in the East. He personally visited Outremer around 1200, and by peppering his text with esoteric references that can only have come about through contact with the more mystically inclined elements in the Muslim world, the Temple and the Arab world. After the Second Crusade's failure, rumors began circulating that the Templars had deliberately sabotaged the crusade through their treacherous alliances with the infidel. The anonymous Würzburg analyst believed that the Templars had accepted a massive bribe from Unur, the ruler of Damascus at the time of the campaign, to engineer the retreat that led to the Crusade's failure. Although accusations like these betray the usual inability of Western chroniclers to grasp the complexities of the situation in the East, where some form of accommodation between the Franks and Islam was a practical necessity, the Templars' reputation does seem to have been tarnished from this time on, at least in the eyes of their critics in the West. As previously mentioned, the Templars frequently hired Muslim secretaries, and several members of the order acquired proficiency in Arabic. Similarly, They maintained an unpredictable, yet sometimes close, relationship with the assassins, widely regarded as the Islamic counterpart of the Templars. The order also came into contact with the Sufis. Therefore, it is not beyond the realms of possibility that ideas from the Islamic world found their way back to Europe via the order. 12th century Moorish Spain, for instance, also acted in this way, with a vast amount of learning coming into Europe via places like the University of Toledo, which had a school entirely devoted to translating works from Arabic. This influx of knowledge had an incalculable effect on the West. Indeed, it would not be too much of an overstatement to suggest that one of the most important things in the intellectual development of the West was the discovery of the East, Arabic culture and science being far in advance of the West at this time. It is this close contact with the Arab world that may have contributed to the alleged religious heterodoxy of the Templars. The Temple and heresy. Religious heterodoxy nearer homes may also have been tainting Templars' thoughts. The order has long been associated with the Cathars, the heretical dualist sect that flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries, mainly in southern France and parts of northern Italy. Alarmed at the spread of the heresy, Pope Innocent proclaimed a crusade against it, which got underway in 1208 under Simon de Montfort. This was the so-called Albigensian Crusade, named after the French town of Albi. The crusade continued intermittently until 1244, when Louis IX's forces destroyed the last Cathar stronghold at Montségur and burned its occupants to death on the field of the cremated. While most Templars would have been simple, unlettered men who adhered to the Catholic Church, there were elements within the order who would have certainly been sympathetic to Catharism. Bertrand de Blanquefort, the sixth Grand Master of the Temple, was from a Cathar family, and the order welcomed Cathars into its ranks once the Albigensian Crusade was underway. The number of Cathar Templars in the Languedoc was so enormous that, in many preceptories, Cathars outnumbered Catholics. People usually cite the constant workforce shortage in the East as the reason for the order's acceptance of excommunicates into its ranks. But this is not the case for the order's sheltering of Cathars in the West, where the workforce situation was not as dire. This apparent friendliness towards the Cathars could be a legacy of Bertrand de Blanquefort, and it could have also led to the order's consideration of the Languedoc, where the Templar presence was particularly strong, as the most likely site for the creation of their own ordensland. Catharism was not the only heresy with which the order has been associated. The Johannite heresy, which holds that John the Baptist is the real Messiah and views Christ as a usurper and false prophet, is the other most prominent heresy. Hugues de Payen himself may have been a Johannite, and the order was known to hold John the Baptist in particularly high regard. The origins for this are obscure, but one possible source could be the Templars' putative original base in the hospital. Around 1100, the Hospitallers, originally known as the Hospital of Jerusalem of John the Almoner, became, the reasons unknown, the Hospital of Jerusalem of John the Baptist. Closely associated with the Johannite movement is the cult of Mary Magdalene. In the 12th century, the cult of the Virgin Mary reached its peak, and people traditionally viewed the two women as the feminine embodiment of God. Saint Bernard himself was obsessed with the divine feminine, and, given his close relationship with the Templars, may have either transmitted a reverence for the feminine to the order, or developed his fascination simultaneously with certain other members of the Templars. It's important to remember that Europe was undergoing rapid changes during this period, known as the Renaissance of the 12th century. And it's interesting to note that periods of great change and inquiry often lead to a resurgence of interest in the goddess. So this begs the question, were the Templars secret goddess shippers? Pope Innocent III certainly thought they were shipping something other than the God of the New Testament and his only son when he admonished the order in his letter of 1208. He accused them of the usual sins of pride and arrogance, accusations that date back at least as far as the Second Crusade, when rumors of the order's alliance with Islam were also beginning to circulate. He also branded them as necromancers, warning them that they were in danger of doing the devil's work unless they rectified their situation. That the Pope would admit that the Templars were wrong suggests that heresy rumors may have been true. The head of the Templars. Charges of devil worship notoriously resurfaced a century later during the order's trial at the hands of Philip IV. This 7-year period is the best documented in the order's history, and it is also the one period in which their alleged unorthodox beliefs were at the center of interest. The French prosecutors focused on two aspects of Templar practice: the initiation ceremony and their supposed worship of an idol named Baphomet. The initiation ceremony allegedly required the new brothers to demonstrate their loyalty to the order by spitting, trampling, or urinating on the cross, and by denying Christ. Traditionally, people have viewed these as further instances of Philip fabricating false accusations. But the recent discovery in the Vatican Library of what is known as the Chignon parchment suggests that the Templars did indeed spit on the cross and deny Christ. Under questioning at Chinon in the summer of 1308, Jacques de Molay explained that these apparently sacrilegious practices were designed to get a Templar to experience the sort of torture he would likely receive at the hands of the Saracens, and thereby enable them to deny their religion with the mind only, and not with the heart. 43. When one recalls that 12 of Philip's spies, who joined the order in 1306 to substantiate the allegations made the year before by the expelled knight Esquin de Floyran, collected some of the evidence against the Templars, it suggests that the charges against the order were indeed true, but Philip's men misunderstood the purpose of these ceremonies. The allegation that the Templars worshipped an idol named Baphomet almost certainly stems from a misunderstood concept. People often described it as a life-sized head, believed to bring fertility to the land, much like the Grail. There's no doubt that the Templars possessed heads. At their preceptory in Nicosia on Cyprus, they possessed the head of Saint Euphemia of Chalcedon. Interestingly, after the arrests at the Paris Temple, they discovered a silver head-shaped reliquary. This bore the inscription Caput Levate, and inside it were parts of a woman's skull, who was believed to have been one of the 11,000 virgins martyred at Cologne with Saint Ursula. Indeed, the assassins may have worshipped the heads in the same manner as the Celts did. The assassins, during their initiation ceremonies, buried the initiate up to his neck in sand, leaving only the head visible before disinterring him. Given their Saracen torture simulation, the Templars may have done this. A further possibility is that Baphomet, long thought to be a mistranslation of Mahomet, the Prophet Muhammad, could well be a corruption of the Arabic word Abu Fihamat, which means father of understanding, a reference to a spiritual seeker after realization or enlightenment has taken place. The Baphomet is none other than the symbol of the completed man. 44. It is possible that the supposed head the Templars worshipped was metaphorical. That Hugues de Payen's shield carried 3 black heads suggests that certain elements within the order, the upper echelons perhaps, were involved with esoteric disciplines learned from the Sufis from the beginning of the temple's existence. The Templars, after 1314. Someone once asked the eminent 19th century Catholic theologian and historian Ignaz Dollinger what he believed to be the most evil day in history. Without hesitation, he responded, Friday, 13th October 1307, saw the arrest of the Templars in France. 45 people felt at the time that the arrests were a criminal act of unprecedented dimensions. In the Purgatorio, Canto 20, Dante compared Philip IV to Pontius Pilate and accused him of avarice. This led to the rapid emergence of myths surrounding the Templars, with Clement dying just a month after Jacques de Molay summoned him to account before God within the year, and Philip himself passing away on 29 November 1314. Although the trial and suppression had succeeded in destroying the Order of the Temple, it failed in other areas. Philip failed to locate the Templars' treasure, and the hospital received most of the Order's lands. The precise number of Templars arrested, ranging from 2,000 to 15,000, remains unclear, as does the number of those who managed to escape. Certainly, the Order seems to have received some tip-off. Shortly before 13th October, Jacques de Molay recalled all the Order's rule books and accounts and had them burnt. Jacques de Molay informed a brother who departed from the Order in 1307 that he was wise due to the impending catastrophe. All French preceptories received a memo prohibiting them from disclosing details about the Order's rites and rituals. Should the Order have been aware of Philip's plans beforehand, it could explain the French king's inability to locate the Order's treasure, assuming it was real and not merely symbolic. Rumor has it that the Order smuggled the treasure out of the Paris temple just before the arrests and transported it by river to the Templars' main naval base at La Rochelle. It is unknown how many Templar ships sailed from La Rochelle in the autumn of 1307 and what they were carrying. But one thing is certain: the Templar treasure vanished completely. If the Order did indeed have some advance warning and an unknown number of Templars escaped, where did they go? The Order of the Temple ceased to exist in 1312, but the Templars continued, leading to various theories about their subsequent fate. The hospital welcomed some Templars, while the Teutonic Knights accepted others. Templars in Portugal went nowhere. King Diniz found the Order innocent of all crimes, and the Templars there changed their name to the Knights of Christ. Under this name, they continued for another 2 centuries and were heavily involved in exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator and Vasco da Gama were both Knights of Christ, as was Christopher Columbus's father-in-law. It is possible that the rumors that the Templars discovered America originated with the exploits of these Knights of Christ. Similarly, the creation of the Order of Montesa in Spain served primarily as a haven for Templars on the run. The fate of the Templar Knights remains unresolved. Almost the only place the ships could have found a safe haven would have been western Scotland, then under the control of Robert the Bruce. Michael Begant and Richard Lee explore this theory at length in their book The Temple and the Lodge, proposing that a contingent of Templars landed in Argyll, assisted Bruce in winning the Battle of Bannockburn, and then continued to reside in Scotland, relatively unmolested. All the Scottish Templars escaped arrest. These Templars and spin-off orders, such as the Scots Guard, helped pave the way for the emergence of Freemasonry. 18th-century Freemasons were quick to capitalize on their supposed Templar ancestry. If Scotland, at odds with England and the papacy, could have offered a safe haven for a group of Templars, then the emerging country of Switzerland could have provided another. A theory suggests that Templars joined the fight for Swiss independence after the first 3 cantons, Uri, Schweiz, and Unterwalden, signed a mutual assistance pact in 1291. Swiss folk tales depict white-clad knights assisting the cantons in their fight against the Holy Roman Empire. The date of 1291 holds significance, as the Templars appeared to lack a reason for their continued existence after that date. Whether or not these knights, assuming they were Templars, saw the emerging Swiss Confederacy as a potential ordensland of their own is impossible to determine, but 2 factors lend credibility to this thesis. Firstly, once established, the Swiss suddenly acquired, as if from nowhere, the best army in Europe. Their military prowess would remain unchallenged until the Battle of Marignano in 1515, when the French comprehensively defeated them. Secondly, Switzerland is famous, or infamous depending upon one's point of view, for its banks. The Templars originated the international banking system that is still in use today, predating the major Italian houses for over a century. Perhaps this is the main legacy the Templars leave behind for us. Desmond Seward notes, "No medieval institution did more for the rise of capitalism than the Templars. A fable agreed upon." The Templars are inseparable from their myth. The strength of this myth sometimes makes it seem as though each writer discussing the Templars is writing about a distinct order, ranging from academics who maintain that the Templars were ordinary men to more speculative writers who portray the order as a secret society of mystical initiates. Since Cornelius Agrippa wrote in his De Occulta Philosophia, 1531, that the Templars committed detestable heresy, 50 subsequent generations of commentators have increasingly obscured the true identity and actions of the Templars. The 18th century Masonic movement, incorporating Neo-Templar influences such as Freemasonry's strict Templar observance form, significantly clouded the truth. Claims surfaced that the order continued to exist in the early 19th century, and the Freemasons produced a highly suspicious list of Grand Masters after 1314. As Michael Begant and Richard Lee noted, academic historians tend to maintain a significant distance from the more speculative apologists for the order, who thrive on the mythical aspects of the Templars. Begant and Lee assert that an event need not actually happen to permeate the collective consciousness and influence subsequent generations. For a myth that can affect history, one need look no further than the myth of Aryan supremacy, which the Nazis held to be gospel, with such catastrophic results. What continues to fascinate about the Templars is this apparent dichotomy between reality and myth, and it is only possible to understand the order as a whole if the mythical aspect is also considered alongside the facts. Umberto Eco notes that conspiracy theorists often incorporate many of their own shortcomings into their theories, regardless of how extreme they may be. What he does not examine, however, is that the hands that write the more standard or orthodox history can also be driven by similar forces. The desire for peer acceptance, the desire to maintain one's position within academe, and, perhaps more importantly, one's funding, all of which would be severely compromised by entertaining the more mythical version of the Templar story. This latter approach ignores anything vaguely speculative about the order and, in doing so, perpetuates a blinkered and restricted view of history. As the revered Tibetan saint Padmasambhava once said, "Things are not what they seem, nor are they otherwise." That the order, even in its own time, was fanatically secretive only compounds the difficulty of arriving at anything close to a definitive account. Therefore, it would be plausible to argue that the Templars were, in the main, very ordinary men, but that certain elements of the order were indeed tainted. Whether we will ever know by what means is, of course, another matter, and whether recent discoveries, such as the Chinon parchment, force us to re-evaluate our thinking about the Templars, one thing remains certain. The mystique and fascination of the Order of Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon will continue to exert their hold, and the aura surrounding the order will continue, maybe deepen even further, and perhaps never be fully fathomed. The mystery will remain.